Greetings, imagination. The Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Robservations with Robert Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the as-yet undefined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am robcasting at you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity, you imagination connoisseurs that make up this glorious audience. This is Robservations, can you believe it, episode. Actually, the volume's down a little low. Sorry about that. This is Robservations episode number 876. The first thing I wanted to do tonight was give a shout out, well, to remember Robbie Robertson, the front man for the band, going from being a backup band to becoming the band, star of the movie The Last Waltz, and then, of course, he had a great solo career. I had a brief opportunity, to work with him on a public service announcement about the Iroquois Confederacy of Nations that was paid for by the Oneida Nation, the people of the Standing Stone. I did this with a producer-director named Baba Cooper, who is no longer with us, and we did this back in 1995, and it was a public service announcement that actually won awards, and it was directed, Baba Cooper, it was her first time directing and producing anything like that, and the Oneida Nation paid for it, and it was a public service announcement about how the Congress finally acknowledged the contribution that the Iroquois Confederacy of Nations made to the United States Constitution. Many of the concepts in our Constitution came from the Iroquois Confederacy, and that was codified in 1987, and this was what this public service announcement was about, and Robbie Robertson narrated it, and he did the music. I put in the chat a link. It's one of the first things I ever posted on YouTube back in 2007, so I apologize. It's hard to hear, and the quality is terrible because back then the resolution was not good, and the only versions we had were NTSC anyway, so they were on VHS. But I figured, you know what, I'd bring it up. I was proud of that. It was one of the first things I did when I went off on my own as a editor, producer, and we did it on the Avid, finished it at AVR 27, and Baba Cooper brought me in, and I was very proud to work with her for a couple of weeks and to help her realize her dream of this public service announcement. And it was very cool because Robbie Robertson, obviously, he grew up on a reservation himself, and he was just really great to work with, and a real delight. And the fact that he came on board and contributed was really special. And I got to talk to him a few times, and I'd seen The Last Waltz, and it was great. So I just want to acknowledge his passing at 80, and I was happy, in my life to have had a brief moment to work with him. So thank you for that, Robbie Robertson, and thank you for helping Baba Cooper realize her dream. And that was fun. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kind souls, gentle beings, however you identify across these, the 28 known galaxies, welcome. You know, there's a bunch of things that were in my mind, and I was trying to think about, do I want to talk about Barbenheimer? What do I want to talk about? And strangely enough, I found myself thinking a lot about, basically because of my ongoing disappointment with modern Star Trek, I was thinking about, well, what it was I wanted to see Star Trek be more of that it isn't. And strangely enough, what I want Star Trek to be more of is science fiction. Star Trek is no longer a science fiction show. It's not particularly interested in science fiction concepts. It's much more of a fantasy show and a show about, it's a soap opera. The interpersonal relationships of the crew of the Starship Enterprise, which is not something it ever really was before. And I keep going back to the 2006 book Blindsight by Peter Watts. And it's a book it's one of those books I never forgot. And it's a really interesting first contact story. And if you read it, it takes place in the future, I think in like 2080 or something, 2088. And it deals with mostly characters that are transhuman. AI is a big part of their world, and how human beings have been modified. Vampires are real, but not the vampires like you. The story posits that vampires were actually real beings that existed for a specific reason, and they died out because, and it's a very interesting thing, in the book they died out because they had strokes, because when human beings started building structures, vampires couldn't see right angles because they didn't occur in nature. I know it's a very strange thing, but all I can tell you is that everybody should read. It's a difficult read. It requires a lot of attention, but it's very worthwhile. It's called Blindsight by Peter Watts. But why I found it interesting, the book is very interesting because there's a revelation. It will not hamper your enjoyment of the book to understand this, but it is a first contact story where humanity encounters aliens that are completely unknowable, and there is no way to communicate with them, and they pose a tremendous threat to us, and they are actually intelligent life but without consciousness. I know it seems a little heady. What does that mean, Rob? It's difficult to explain, and I would say reading the book will allow you the joys of discovering this for yourself. But once you've read it, I assure you that Mr. Watts' book will not leave you anytime soon. But in it, there was something that I encountered, at least I remember encountering it in this book for the first time. And I wanted to start with this because it sort of speaks to where we're going, I think, as a people. And it's a thought experiment called The Chinese Room. And I just would like to start with this. I want to read an article about what that is. And I first encountered it in the book Blindsight by Peter Watts. So, this comes from Sabinasz.net. It's someone's blog. Daniel Sabinatz's personal website, and Cognitive Science blog is where this comes from. And I don't know when this was written, to be honest, but I found it and I wanted to read it to you. Why the Chinese room argument is flawed. This text deals with the arguments against the possibility of so-called strong artificial intelligence, with a particular focus on the Chinese room argument devised by philosopher John Searle. We start with a description of the thesis that Searle wants to disprove. Then we describe Searle's arguments. Subsequently, we take a look at some objections to Searle by other influential philosophers. And finally, I conclude with my own objection that introduces a more accurate definition of strong artificial intelligence, which renders Searle's arguments invalid. Along the way, we will dispose of some common misconceptions about artificial intelligence. Searle's argument, the semantic argument. In his essay, Can Computers Think?, Searle gives his own definition of strong artificial intelligence, which he subsequently tries to refute. His definition is as follows. One could summarize this view by saying that the mind is to the brain as the program is to the computer hardware. Searle's first attempt at refuting the possibility of strong artificial intelligence is based on the insight that mental states have, by definition, a certain semantic content or meaning. Programs, on the other hand, are purely formal and syntactical, i.e., a sequence of symbols that do not have a meaning in themselves. Therefore, a program could not be equivalent to a mind. A formal reconstruction of this argument looks as follows. Syntax is not sufficient for semantics. Programs are completely characterized by their formal syntactical structure. Human minds have semantic content. Therefore, programs are not sufficient for creating a mind. Searle emphasizes the fact that his argument is based solely on the property that programs are defined formally, regardless of which physical system is used to run the program. Therefore, it does not state that it is impossible for us today to create a strong artificial intelligence, but that this is generally impossible for any conceivable machine in the future, regardless of how fast it is or which other properties it might have. The Chinese room argument. In order to make his first premise more plausible, syntax is not sufficient for semantics, Searle describes a thought experiment, the Chinese room. Assume there were a program that is capable of answering Chinese questions in Chinese. No matter which question you pose in Chinese, it gives you an appropriate answer that a human Chinese speaker might also give. Searle now tries to argue that a computer running this program doesn't actually understand Chinese in the same sense as a Chinese human being understands Chinese. To this end, he assumes that the formal instructions of the program are carried out by a person who does not understand Chinese. This person is locked in a room, and the Chinese questions are passed into the room as a sequence of symbols. The room contains baskets with many other Chinese symbols, along with a list of formal instructions, which are purely syntactical rules that tell the person how to produce an answer to the question by assembling the symbols from the baskets. The answer generated by these instructions are then passed out of the room by the person. The person is not aware that the symbols that are passed into the room are questions, and the symbols that are passed out of the room are answers to these questions. He just blindly carries out the instructions strictly and correctly. And these instructions generate meaningful Chinese sentences that are answers to the questions, which couldn't be distinguished from the answers a real Chinese-speaking person would give. Now, Searle raises attention to the fact that the person in the room doesn't understand Chinese simply by following formal instructions for generating answers. He continues to argue that a computer running a program that generates Chinese answers to Chinese questions therefore also doesn't understand Chinese. Since this experiment could be generalized to arbitrary tasks, Searle concludes that the computers are inherently incapable of understanding something. Replies to the Chinese room argument. There are numerous objections to the Chinese room argument by various authors. Many of these arguments are similar in nature. In the following, I will present the most commonly presented ones, including answers to these objections by Searle himself. The systems reply. One of the most commonly raised objections is that even though the person in the Chinese room does not understand Chinese, the system as a whole does. The room, with all of its constituents, including the person. This objection is often called the systems reply, and there are various versions of it. For example, artificial intelligence researcher, entrepreneur, and author Ray Kurzweil says in something that the person is only an executive unit and that its properties are not to be confused with the properties of the system. If one looks at the room as an overall system, the fact that the person does not understand Chinese doesn't entail that this also holds for the room. Cognitive scientist Margaret Bowden argues that the human brain is not the carrier of intelligence, but rather that it causes intelligence. Analogously, the person in the room causes an understanding of Chinese to arise, even though it does not understand Chinese itself. Searle responds to the systems reply with the semantic argument. Even the system as a whole couldn't go from syntax to semantics, and hence couldn't understand the meaning of Chinese symbols. He adds that the person in the room could theoretically memorize all of the formal rules and perform all of the computations in its head. Then he argues the person is the entire system, could answer Chinese questions without help, and perhaps even lead Chinese conversations, but still wouldn't understand Chinese since it only carries out formal rules and can't associate a meaning with the formal symbols. The virtual mind reply. Similar to the systems reply, the virtual mind reply states that the person does not understand Chinese, but that a running system could create new entities that differ from both the person and the system as a whole. The understanding of Chinese could be a new entity of this sort. This standpoint is argued for by artificial intelligence researcher Marvin Minsky and philosopher Tim Maudlin. Maudlin notes that Searle didn't provide an adequate answer to this reply thus far. Now there's the robot reply. Another reply changes the thought experiment in such a way that the person is put into a robot that can perceive the world through sensors, like cameras or microphones, and interact with the world via effectors, like motors or loudspeakers. This casual interaction with the environment, the argument goes, is a guarantee that the robot understands Chinese, since the formal symbols are endowed with semantics this way, namely objects in the real world. This view presupposes an externalist semantics. This reply is raised, for example, by Margaret Bowden. Searle answers to this argument with the semantic argument. The robot still only has a computer as its brain and couldn't go from syntax to semantics. He makes this more plausible by adapting the thought experiment such that the Chinese room itself is integrated into a robot as its central processing unit. The Chinese symbols would then be generated by sensors and passed into the room. Analogously, the symbols passed out of the room would control the effectors, and even though the robot interacts with the external world this way, the person in the room still doesn't understand the meaning of the symbols. Now, I could go on, but I won't, because I bet most of you are going, what the fuck are you even talking about? First of all, I'm going to put this article into the chat so you can read the rest of it. The whole point of all of this, by the way, first of all, I just dropped in the Robbie Robertson video. What does all this mean? Well, it was just a really simple way to say that we don't really have artificial intelligence yet. We're talking about AI. And the real question is, can an artificial intelligence program, which might have syntax but not semantics, ever hope to write the great American novel? Or could it ever hope to create anything unique to itself that had never been seen before, because it has the syntax but not the semantics? And as somebody has often said, until AI has its heart broken, it's never going to be able to write a great love song. It can only copy, emulate, mix and match love songs that have already been written. And while it might understand the form, it will never understand the meaning. And so, should Hollywood, or should authors, or should musicians? I mean, I was watching a video earlier of a robot playing table tennis. And it was a biped robot, and it was smoking the person that it was playing. We will be able to have machines that can achieve perfection. We are going to see machines that can probably play any, piano concerto ever written perfectly. And you can program it to add whatever flourishes you want. But again, the robot will understand the syntax, but not necessarily the semantics, unless, of course, it's programmed with the semantics. But again, it won't understand what it's playing. It'll play only what it's been programmed to play. But will there be inspiration? Could a robot in the middle randomly go from formal classicism to, say, a jazz-infused riff on Chopin or something? I doubt it. So, are we going to be fearful that AI is going to replace the arts? I'm fearful that maybe a kid who will be sitting at home punching in prompts to get the great American or great European or great Chinese or Indian rock song, or write the perfect Bollywood tune using prompts, and when the tune is spit out to this person, they think it's genius, and they're the ones that are responsible for it. But again, they would understand, maybe they can feel the results of they might get a little bit of the semantics, but do they really understand it? But will that person pick up an instrument? That's the real thing. Will people want to write anymore? I think that art, the artistic impulse, is something that comes from humanity. I think it's innate inside of us. Because we ask ourselves, why are we here? It's like what V'ger was asking. Is there nothing more? When Spock takes Kirk's hand in Star Trek The Motion Picture and says that this simple feeling, V'ger, the ultimate logic in the universe, but this simple feeling of two people holding hands is beyond V'ger's comprehension. Star Trek used to be very prophetic, very interesting, very insightful. Those days are long gone. But anyway, I wanted to start out with that, and because the Chinese room argument was something that I first encountered in Peter Watt's book, Blindsight, which is why I like reading science fiction. And, I read that book when it came out in 2006. So I wanted to start there, sort of, because everyone's talking about AI. AI this, AI that. What AI is going to do, it is going to have all the syntax, but none of the semantics. And it's not going to understand what it's created. And all it's going to do is borrow and mix and match. But for true inspiration, the singularity is not here yet. So AI is not, at least in my mind, going to be able to replace anything. Not yet. Now, here is an article that I wanted to read that I thought was a terrific article that was in The Ankler. Some of you may have read it, but it's by Elina Smith, and she is the creator and showrunner of Apple TV's Dickinson. And it's quite great. And this article says, Death Spiral of Hollywood Monopolies. Too big to fail, not so fast. A showrunner's cautionary memo. This was written on August 7th by Elina Smith, and it's in The Ankler. And if you don't subscribe to The Ankler and you're interested in the entertainment business, I would suggest that you do. Hollywood is broken. More than $500 billion has been wiped off the market value of the world's biggest media companies this year. While on the streets, hundreds of thousands of writers and actors are on strike, bringing the industry to a grinding halt at a moment when it most needs to prove its resilience. as the oddly mismatched mega companies who currently produce, own, and distribute TV shows and movies fumble to align themselves on basic issues of minimum compensation and worker protection, along with the looming technological shifts of AI, it has become clear that the only goal these corporations have in common is to gain market power and then exploit it. That is, to monopolize. This monopoly power, once grabbed, is used to lower costs and hedge risk for Wall Street investors, primarily by reducing or eliminating the bargaining leverage of artists and independent producers by continuing to consolidate or vertically integrate along different and conflicting lines of business, and by raising prices for the consumer, which, by the way, have you noticed your streaming services? So, it's a bummer. This monopoly power, once grabbed, is used to lower costs and hedge risk for the Wall Street investors, primarily by reducing or eliminating the bargaining leverage of artists and independent producers, by continuing to consolidate or vertically integrate along different and conflicting lines of the business, and by raising prices for the consumer. All the while, the entertainment they sell continues to decline in cultural relevance. Without regulation of these monopolies, Hollywood will succumb to a death spiral, planting a stake in the heart of the entertainment industry, one of America's most lucrative exports, whose stories and stars have defined our culture for the past century or more. The story of the streaming wars has been widely told by now, but I'll provide a short recap. In the pilot episode of this limited series, so to speak, TV and film's great disruption was kicked off by Netflix, who came raging into the business with a fire hose of speculative cash, unleashing the biggest spending spree in the history of the industry. Netflix did so while deploying the classic Silicon Valley strategies of predatory pricing, vertical integration, and hoarding of data in order to grab market share and make it impossible for the so-called legacy media companies, translation, those dinosaurs who still needed to make a profit off of entertainment, to compete. Netflix, like Uber and Yes, We Work, was selling a story of unlimited growth and infinite scale, of monopolistic market domination. As long as interest rates remained at zero and subscription numbers kept going up, Wall Street bought the story. And so did the old guard of legacy media, who, tossing aside a century's worth of experience and relationships in their notoriously unpredictable entertainment business, one by one threw their hats in the streaming ring, seduced by the promise of unwavering growth, each starting their own, often amusingly named, direct-to-consumer subscription content platforms. Artists, too, were bamboozled by Netflix's sexy new model of overpaying everyone up front in order to exclusively control the back end and keep any quantifiable audience response hidden globally forever. And once Netflix made this model the new normal, other companies followed suit. Now there were no more Nielsen ratings, no more box office numbers, no more publicly available feedback loop of any kind to reveal to anyone, artists, executives, audiences, critics, which of the ever-mounting heap of shows or movies were actually being watched and enjoyed. To make matters still more murky, Amazon and Apple joined the money-burning carnival, setting up in-house branding operations disguised as entertainment studios that were really just diversified value adds to products and bundles that form the core of their massive tech ecosystems. My show, Dickinson, was one of just 4 series to launch Apple's global streaming service in 2019. And to this day, I have no earthly clue how many people have seen it, nor what value my near decade of creative labor generated for the company. Not only do I have no metrics for my own success, I don't even know how Apple would determine those metrics in the first place. In their mad rush off the digital cliff, these companies transformed Hollywood from a high-wage, high-profit, hits-driven industry into a low-wage, low-profit, subscription-driven one. They also broke the basic bargain at the heart of show business, which is that creative artists and independent producers will share in the financial success their work creates. How this ends. So we've reached the final episode of this limited series. The streaming bubble bursts. The story is a scam. In the second quarter of 2022, Netflix reports its first ever subscriber losses, and 30% of its market value disappears overnight, dragging the other media company stocks down with it. Interest rates go up, and infinite scale proves to be a mirage. Netflix now is doing the unthinkable, adding advertisements, cracking down on password sharing, and even releasing TV shows once a week like an old school network. However, it's still not paying those old school residuals. Hundreds of thousands of entertainment workers are on strike, while, ominously, the only projects still filming are union-dodging enterprises, many of which have already been outsourced to international locations. Broken promises and disappointments are everywhere. Diversity initiatives disbanded, shows yanked off platforms or trashed even before being released. Oscar winners who can't get DVDs of their films. All that's promised to Hollywood now are further mergers and consolidations, as well as all of the jobs being handed to robots. In the words of David Zaslav himself, this was a failed experiment. Let's face it, he said on a November 2022 earnings call, the strategy to collapse all windows, starve linear TV and theatrical, and spend money with abandon, while making a fraction in return, all in the service of growing sub numbers, has ultimately proven to be deeply flawed. The monopolistic streaming system, as it turns out, works for nobody in Hollywood. Not the execs, not the shareholders, and not the audience. Even the most successful creators of TV and film are hurt by this arrangement, because without clear metrics to determine the success or failure of projects, artists have no way of knowing what they're worth, nor of knowing how their acts of communication are being received. The only thing artists know is that they can't have an old-fashioned genuine hit, because the subscription-driven business model of streaming removes the opportunity for that. The only audience that matters is Wall Street, and the only potential star is the platform itself. This is also why we aren't minting any new movie stars. How can you have a movie star without a hit movie? The black box of vertically integrated, data-hoarding streaming platform traps us all in the dark and has destroyed the basic functioning of our industry. We need a political coalition to break up the studio streamers, or we will lose the ability to sustain the TV and film industry that has been the beating heart of our culture for over 100 years. We need structural separation to better distinguish and disintegrate the internally conflicted businesses of production and distribution. We need to make the entertainment industry genuinely competitive again and stop this one-way slide toward monopoly and monopsony. And we need this now, while there is still an industry of highly skilled craftspeople to save. You might say, if you were a viewer of my limited series about the streaming wars, we've seen this movie before. Unregulated platform capitalism has already chewed up and spat out most of the 20th century's once profitable culture industry, from music to journalism to books. People often blame the internet for this rampant destruction of livelihoods, as if the technology itself were some kind of demon, hell-bent on erasing the value of creative work. The same naive ascription of agency is already being popularly given to AI. But as antitrust advocate Matt Stoller has said, technological innovation happens along the legal framework it is born into. We can control and structure the marketplace of the internet through our laws and enforcement of those laws. We can eliminate glaring corporate conflicts of interest and make the web, our now de facto gathering space as a society, a better place to be an artist and an audience member. We've done it before, through laws like the Paramount Consent Decree, which legally separated the production and distribution of films, thereby ending the autocratic studio system of that era. Or the FinCEN rules of the 1970s, which blocked TV networks from distributing their own content during primetime hours, ushering in a golden age of independent TV production. We can do it again, and we must, or one of America's great exports, the films and television of Hollywood, will simply vanish. There will be no culture left aside from the algorithmically imposed, AI-generated, economically exploitative feed of digital sludge. We're already well on our way to that dystopia, but we can still change course. We must restore open markets for TV and film and stop these monopolies from ruining a time-honored industry that has, for generations, created so much of what makes it good to be alive. I fucking love that essay, and I wanted to read it. I thought I would share it with you all. Now, once again, that comes from The Ankler. And that is, you can subscribe to that. Richard Rushfield's newsletter. It comes out every day. I highly recommend, if you're interested in the entertainment business, you check it out. I thought that was all those points were very salient points, and they go a long way to understanding what is going on in terms of our industry right now and what people are fighting for and what people are fighting over. And see, the thing is, the frustrating thing about all of this is movies and television, movies more so because we've had movies for over 100 years now, they're all made the same way. There's no difference. I mean, obviously, we have more tools. I was watching Fast-X yesterday, and I was pondering the fact that I loved the Fast and Furious franchise. Fast-X, to me, is almost virtually unwatchable. I'm watching this, and there is nothing about it. It's the same characters. There's nothing about it that I like. It looks like it was artificially generated. I hate the way it's shot. I hate the way it's edited. I don't believe any of it. It's all a cartoon. And to me, even though it was made by people, I do feel that that's our future. I feel like Fast-X might be the first artificially generated film ever made, even though it wasn't artificially generated. But I feel like the what it's like to watch that movie is what it's going to be like to watch AI-generated content. And make no mistake, we're going to have completely AI-generated movies that can star whoever you want to be in them. They can be about whatever, but they're going to be almost unwatchable because, again, the difference between syntax and semantics. You really do need a person who understands how to edit, understands how to create a scene, understands how to create character. Because you might know the syntax, but do you know the semantics? And I feel that's kind of a funny thing to say about a movie like Fast-X, which seems to be AI generated. But the point is that the business of movie making and how movies are made has not changed. What has changed is, as this essay or this piece so eloquently points out, is the methodology behind how these products, and they are products, are delivered to the consumer, and how the people that are actually making the product are being treated by the companies that desire to make this. And I think one of the very interesting things now, we have in theaters right now graphic examples of what's working about Hollywood and what's not working about Hollywood. Now, for whatever reason, the Barbenheimer, call it, I guess, The Happening. Apologies to anybody who now thinks of the M. Night Shyamalan film, which, by the way, I read the script and I had really high hopes for. And when I first saw it, I walked out of the theater shaking my head going, what the fuck happened, man? But anyway, no one could have predicted it. And we're going to be reading essays about this for months, I'm sure. And every marketing department in Hollywood is going to be puzzling over, how can we do it again? Well, you can't. It was a perfect storm, and it was completely created by, everyone talks about how many levels, or the three-dimensional, the Barbenheimer idea appealed to a 4-quadrant group, everybody from kids who didn't even care about Oppenheimer or Barbie, but you put the two together, it was all memeable. It happened. It was an explosion. It was kind of like the Big Bang. All the elements were there, but something happened. There was a spark of creation, not divine, but it was certainly collective of humanity online. It was everybody together creating the moment that is now Barbenheimer, that has helped Barbie, a movie about Barbie, a subversive film about Barbie that I've actually now seen. And I have to tell you, I was actually quite surprised by Barbie, and how much is actually there. And yeah, there's people, I mean, Bill Maher can say what he wants. I don't necessarily think Bill Maher was wrong, but I'm like, so what? There's no reason why those stories, there's a lot of movies that I love whose politics is suspect, that has messaging that is archaic. I don't care. My own beloved To Live and Die in LA, people said even when it came out, Rob, those characters are unlikable. People have said about my own film, Free Enterprise, you made a movie where all the main characters are unlikable. I'm like, so what? I still like To Live and Die in LA, and I made a movie where the characters are unlikable to some people. But Barbie is a movie that has a lot going on. You can look at it on many different levels. It was very, very clever. And, somebody asked me what I meant by auteurist. I said that Barbie was auteurist. Look, if a movie is written and directed by somebody, obviously, first of all, the idea of the auteur theory came from the French critics, people that wrote for the French film journal Cahiers du Cinéma, and people like André Bazin, and when Godard and Truffaut and all those guys, before they even became filmmakers, they were critics writing for Cahiers du Cinéma. And the idea of the auteur theory was that the director is the author of the movies, much to the chagrin of many writers out there. But in my mind, auteur filmmaking is when you have a writer-director. That to me is, or a writer-director, and a writer like Kubrick himself would work with another writer. But I think Barbie is absolutely an auteurist film. And it represents what Greta Gerwig was able to do, and someone, it was so funny. Someone on one of the comments on this channel was talking about, well, Rob, it's not like they're Tarantino, and I'm like, look, you don't have to be a legendary director like Kurosawa or Tarantino or Coppola to be considered an auteurist filmmaker. You don't have to be in the top echelon, the 1%, to be an auteurist filmmaker. I mean, John Carpenter's written some of his own scripts, and I consider John Carpenter an auteur. There's all different kinds of auteurs out there, but definitely Greta Gerwig is an auteur. She's a writer-director. And Barbie is definitely, to me, an auteurist piece of cinema. Now, the same is true of Oppenheimer. So what's very interesting, while all these people, all this doomsaying is happening about Hollywood, and as you look at the incredible losses suffered by the industry in terms of money, because Wall Street does not mix, just like corporate thinking does not mix with the entertainment business. It doesn't. Because at the end of the day, corporate thinking will never, ever, ever be responsible for great storytelling. So it's ironic, by the studios being acquired in these mergers, and they're being acquired by larger and larger corporations, they're moving further. I will even say this. I am by no means an expert in economic theory, but I can tell you this. A corporation doesn't know fuck all about making movies. And as we allow the people that are controlling, and by the way, a lot of people that control the studios and work at the agencies, none of those people know fuck all about making movies either. They're making deals about getting their talent. It's so funny because when you think about it, agents, they're going to get their talent somewhere, but they don't really know what their talent does. They don't know the process. I've always been, one of my favorite things is to watch people come to a movie set. An agent, maybe friends of actors, whatever. People come to movie sets, and it's like the first half an hour they're on a set, they're all really excited. But if they're still there 3 or 4 hours later, there are a few people that are going to be always enamored of the process. But for the most part, especially people, studio executives and agents, no one gets bored faster on movie sets than they do. One, because they don't know what's going on. because what's really interesting is when you go to a movie set, you expect to see some semblance of the magic of what it's like to actually sit down and watch a movie. Now, when you watch a scene being shot, you're watching snippets of scenes being shot. I mean, sometimes you'll shoot a long master and you'll see a scene from beginning, middle, and end, and you get a sense of what the scene's going to be. But you're watching it from a distance. You're watching it play out in a master shot. And you don't get to see what the camera's seeing. I mean, you might be at Video Village and you'll get kind of an idea. And now they have the possibilities of playing. You can be cutting on the fly on set. But you don't really want to be doing that because then people start watching too much and you're like, no, it's a big distraction. You have somebody in a room doing that shit, but not in front of people, not a Video Village. But the funny thing about being on a movie set, it does not at all give you any sense of what you're going to see when you see the movie eventually in the theater. And watching people, watching captains of industry, watching agents, especially agents, watching studio executives come to set. I mean, you see them come down, they might have a meal, they'll stand and be like, okay, great, and they're gone because they don't know what they're looking at, they don't know what's going on. So what you have now is, imagine that on a much larger scale, when you have these multi-billion-dollar corporations with all of these people, they've got global worries about money and things, and they don't know the first thing about how a movie's made. Not at all. And yet they've acquired these companies and they're trying to like make them work. AT&T found out about that the hard way. You know, that they lasted their love affair with Hollywood lasted what, a year? It's like, we got to get rid of this studio. They didn't know what to do with it. Because telling stories requires a certain mindset and an understanding that, I'm sorry, most people don't have. And I think that's the real problem with Hollywood. The real problem is, as these entertainment companies are getting absorbed by larger and larger corporations, the business of what they're doing, which is making entertainment, is diametrically opposed to the needs of what Wall Street wants. Explosive growth. I mean, it doesn't work. It never was going to work. And that's what we're seeing more and more of. And people thought that streaming was going to somehow... How was streaming going to everybody looks at Netflix and Netflix. The thing about Netflix is all that Netflix has is their subscriptions. Whatever they make on their subscriptions, that's the money they have. They're not selling things. Amazon's making shows as they said in this article, as an adjunct to getting your Prime subscription. What is your Prime subscription? It's to get you to buy things, all things you need. And Prime, I just renewed my Prime membership for the year. It went up, $20 or whatever, but I use Amazon so much that over the course of 365 days, the amount of stuff I get from Amazon, everything from dog food to Blu-rays to 4Ks to books to whatever I need, to modeling supplies to build my gunpla, whatever. I can get it all from Amazon, and their TV shows are an afterthought. The Boys is an afterthought, even though I love The Boys. And what's going to save, I think, Hollywood, if you can say that, and we're seeing the people that actually have to make this stuff, the writers, the actors that star in it. I mean, the writers and the actors are on strike. The directors, everyone else is twiddling their thumbs. The crews. I was listening to a story of a prop house on NPR today. A husband and wife started this prop house 40 years ago in their apartment here in Hollywood. Now they have a 40-year-old prop house that is sitting idle, and they worked on the biggest movies. They provided things to Oppenheimer. They have a fat man and a little boy prop, and they're not working. And they have nothing to do with. There's no prop house union, I don't think. Can you be an IATSE if you're in the prop business? I don't know, maybe. But their house, what a prop house is let's say you need something to dress a set. You go to a prop house and you rent it. If I want to do a photo shoot and I want to have people from the Revolutionary War in my photo shoot, I can go to a prop house and they have all kinds of guns from that era. And I can rent guns from the mid-1800s if I need them. They don't work, of course. They're not real guns. They're prop guns. But still, you can get whatever you want. They're not working. This strike has ground an industry to a halt, and the actors and the writers are a very small part of that industry. There's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of other people out of work. The lighting technicians, the grips, costumers, makeup, construction, all the art departments. No one's working. And the thing is, I believe in what the writers and the actors are doing, because this paradigm, if they hadn't done this, I think that the entertainment business as we know it would have gone right off a cliff, and people would have been standing around in the middle of the ruins of what was once a great thriving business and asked themselves, well, what the hell is going on? Everybody still wants to be entertained. And the thing is, the way entertainment has been made has not changed. Look at the Emmy Award nominees this year. Look at the comedy and the dramatic nominees for Best Series. We're getting incredible writing now. We're getting incredible acting. Incredible entertainment is being made now. The level, especially of the streaming shows themselves, is amazing. The problem is that it used to be, the model was, if you have a great TV show, a lot of people watched it, you had advertisers paying for it, so each individual show had an income stream that was coming in. Not just paying for it, a studio would pay for it, but advertisers, it had an ongoing income stream coming in to each TV show. And if a show was very successful and it went into what's called strip syndication, meaning like if it's no longer being aired just on a network, like 5 years into a show, there might be repeats of a show syndicated locally around the country. And then, of course, it gets really lucrative when you sell a network show around the world. France buys the rights to, say, I don't know, House or Friends. And then Germany buys the rights. And each individual country makes their own deal to show that show in their country. That's where money comes from. And that income of cash is what was distributed to the writers in the form of residuals. And you can be on a hit show, and that gravy train goes on for a very, very long time. So that's a very lucrative thing. The writers don't get that anymore. And now look, on the one hand, I'm sympathetic to the producers. Say you make a Netflix show, there is no other income stream on a Netflix show. There's just a subscription. And even if you have a Squid Game, or even if you have a Stranger Things, Netflix is still, they don't charge more if you want to watch Stranger Things. You pay their one subscription fee, and collectively, however much they take in, however many billions of dollars based on, 200 million subscribers or 250 million subscribers, what they're paying every month is what comes in. Now, a hit show on Netflix, there is no other revenue stream. They're paying for it. They're paying out. And for every Stranger Things and for every Squid Game they've got 30 other shows that aren't that. And so how would they possibly give residuals out? I don't know, to be honest. I'm not smart enough to understand how anyone expects Netflix to give residuals out, because they don't have the revenue stream of a show like a network show, how they used to have that revenue stream. So I don't know how that works. And I don't think that if a show gets more views on Netflix, just because a show gets 1 million or 1 billion hours of views on Netflix, people I know think that they should be compensated for that. But where does the money to compensate them come from? Because you can't just say, oh, okay, Stranger Things or Squid Game is one of our biggest shows, but we still have to pay for all the other shows that aren't those. And it's, for Netflix, it's collective. So I don't understand how and that's why they've been very reluctant to even talk to anybody, because they know that there are no residuals. Of course, I don't understand why they pay $220 million to make a movie like The Gray Man to the Russo brothers. Because is it supposed to jack up their subscriptions because of that particular movie? But how would people know? I mean, it would make more sense to me if they would put The Gray Man out like any other studio in the movie theater, and have trailers for it and do a release pattern where it opens on 4,000 screens or 6,000 screens and make it a big summer tentpole release. Because if they made $1 billion on their big movies, well, then they could pay residuals. They could pay residuals the way that they've always been paid, based on box office performance. But they don't do that. And if they do it, they only do it for a week or two. So I don't know how that's going to work out. And the fact that because of Wall Street, what happens with Wall Street is you need to maximize your profits and figure out ways to cut down on how much you're spending. And the first thing that goes is people. How can we pay writers less? And what's funny to me is that, my God, the profligate spending that these streaming services are doing on these shows. You know, you hear about Amazon spending $300 million on Citadel, and you read that there were 2 different editorial camps. The Russo brothers were cutting their own versions of the episodes, and then they were rewriting them and going, like, you know what? If you guys don't know, with this kind of money being spent, you'd think, and by the way, the people that know how to make television and movies, they're really good at it. And when you hire them, they really know what they're doing. Now, there's people that are being hired to make these shows that don't know fuck all about production. For whatever reason, and I've said on the show, you know, I talk a lot about meritocracy, but I'll tell you something. The skill to make a weekly show, to make a network show or a movie, whether you're working at the indie level or at the highest level of Hollywood, you need the best people. You need the people that know what they're doing. Because every second on a movie set or a television set or a streaming series, every second has a dollar value associated with it. And if you were burning, imagine if you were burning $20 a second. That's what they're doing on a movie set. And it's a lot more than $20. And if you don't have people, if you have somebody that costs you 60 seconds, that's $20 times 60. If you have people that are not qualified to be working at that level, they got to be gone. And unfortunately, right now, Hollywood also has that problem. There's a lot of unqualified people in positions for various reasons that shouldn't be there. And I don't care what color you are. I don't care what shape you are. I don't care your politics. I don't care your sexuality. If you know what you're doing, you should be on a movie set. And if you don't, you shouldn't. Because those kinds of things don't matter. What matters is the work. You got to get the work done, and it's expensive to make movies and TV. And I'm seeing more than ever on every level. I'm seeing unqualified people working at jobs that they haven't yet achieved. They might be great at them someday, and I guess, hey, trial by fire is great, but why are things costing $300 million for 6 episodes of 40 minutes? That's just unbelievable. That's all part of it as well. We have to get back to the process of filmmaking and streaming TV show making the way it used to be made. And things are way too expensive. They've spun way out of control. And the people that are holding the reins of power don't know how to produce the very product that they're selling. And when it comes right down to it, from my perspective, as a indie producer, director, writer, editor, post supervisor, VFX supervisor, I can do all those things. You know, Tango Shalom, hey, I didn't write the story. I didn't direct it. I love Gabe who directed it. He did a great job with what was there. Done for very little amount of money. I'll tell you what I did was finish it. I can finish it. That's what I can do. I can come in, I can cut it, I can oversee all of the posts, VFX, whatever you need. I can finish it. I know I can do that on every level. I've only done it on a low budget level, but it's not any different. If you gave me $200 million, the job is the same. And I would understand that process and I can get it done. But we need people that can, and there are people that know, and they're out there. There's people on the picket lines that know how to write and know how to show run that aren't being allowed to do their jobs. And, that needs to end. So anyway, what else? First of all, I've got more articles to read on this show. I just want to check in with you guys and see what you had to say before I moved forward, because I know that people are firing in. If there's any super chats coming in, I want to make sure I see them. Shaun O'Brien. First of all, Gill is a new member of the channel. Gill, thank you for becoming a member of the channel. Shaun O'Brien says, "Hi, Rob. How do you think the idea that a percentage, say 5%, of each subscriber's fee was allowed to calculate residuals and Netflix split that dollar pro rata based on the minutes that user watched in that month?" That is an interesting idea, but I don't necessarily think it works because the problem is Netflix is paying for everything, every different kind of show. So that would be something rather difficult to, something along those lines maybe, but I just think it would be incredibly difficult to make that work in any way. I just don't see how that could work, at least not now. But something along those lines. I think that what it would have to be is each individual show. Here's what I would say. Okay. Each individual show, a percentage of the budget of the show could be held back for residuals or something. I could see something along those lines happen. But who knows? I don't know. DirtyMotherTousend says, "Hi, Rob. I'm wondering if you're familiar with Umbrella Entertainment from Australia. They have an amazing selection of genre Blu-rays and collector sets. I purchased heavy metal from their site, and it came with a heavy metal can air freshener." Oh, I'm very familiar with Umbrella Entertainment. As a matter of fact, they've got a great set on Andrzej Zulewski's Possessions coming out. They're putting out a great Dune set. Peter Weir's The Last Wave in 4K. Umbrella's great. As a matter of fact, for anybody out there, I missed their Martyrs box set, and I'm keen to get one. So if anyone else out there wants to part with their Umbrella Martyrs set, please, please give it to me, because I want it. DirtyMotherTousend says, "Hi, Rob. We need your skincare routine. You're always glowing, and we're all extremely jealous." I'll tell you something. To be honest, I'm a little metrosexual in that way. I am a big fan of Dermalogica products. In my shower every morning, I use Dermalogica special gel, special conditioning gel. I use Dermalogica cream underneath my eyes because I tend to get bags under my eyes, and that's about it, But I've used Dermalogica products for a long time, and I really like them. Look, to be honest, I'd totally go Patrick Bateman and do the whole peeling and all that moisturizing and do 1,000 crunches every day. I would love to do that, but I don't have the patience. Dermalogica, it works. At least it works for me. So thank you for saying that. I do appreciate that. But Shaun O'Brien, I keep going back to that. They could set aside a percentage of things, but the problem is, for every hit show that Netflix has, they have 20 shows that aren't, and they still have to pay for those as well. So when you don't have, and the thing is, here's the thing: if a Netflix show becomes a huge hit, it's not generating any extra income for Netflix. They've already got the subscribers, and if all of their subscribers are watching one show, that doesn't bring them any more money. The only thing that it might bring them is new subscribers. Oh, I gotta watch Squid Game. So everybody's talking about Squid Game, so they sign up, and that's the only thing that they can really see. And I guess you could try and figure something out, but there's no real way. People have said, well, they can see as soon as somebody subscribes, you can see what they've watched. Okay, but that's not like, if you were having if a show had ad-based, some kind of, if you're getting advertising dollars in, you could say of those advertising dollars, you can actually take every dollar and there's a percentage that comes out, and you can understand what to pay people. I honestly don't know how Netflix would ever pay residuals. I really don't understand it because of all the shows that they make. Who knows which ones are going to hit and which ones aren't? And do reality shows, if a show like Fuckboy Island, I don't think that's a Netflix show, but just as an example, let's say Fuckboy Island becomes a hit. I think it was on HBO or something. Well, I don't know where it was. But does Fuckboy Island get the same residuals as Squid Game or Stranger Things or Mindhunter? And if a reality show is different than, obviously, a SAG show, how does that work? So to be honest, I have no idea. I think that the Netflix thing is definitely a dilemma, and I don't understand how to deal with that. I really don't. I don't know. BrownTownReviews said, I honestly think people did not appreciate shows on networks. Those shows had big issues that made them of their time, but I would take Castle or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. over She-Hulk and Secret Invasion. Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to the quality of the shows. I think that there's someone's going to write the great analysis. Like, I really wish, I mean, we can all be angry about, like, look, I love the MCU. I love the first 23 movies of the MCU. The ones that were even not so great, I love. You go back and you watch Iron Man 2, it's a lot better than you remember it. It's entertaining. The MCU, and I'll tell you something, I was on briefly today on Critical Drinker, and Mahler, whether you like Mahler or not, I mean, I talk about my fellow YouTubers and people get mad at me, but I really like Mahler's analysis. And Mahler made some really great points about the MCU. He would say that, okay, in Avengers Age of Ultron, the Sokovia Accords and what happened because of what happened in Age of Ultron informed what went on in Civil War. And that's what was so great about, and he was correct, and he went back and did a brief analysis of why the MCU worked. Everything informed the things that came before informed the things that came after. The things that happened with the Avengers spread out through the rest of the MCU, and it really, really worked. Now, with Phase 4, with all the different MCU movies and the MCU shows, there's no cohesion at all. Is the Skrull invasion going to be something that's going to be touched upon in Marvels or in Captain America: New World Order? I would expect so, but I feel that the MCU is completely disjointed. I still enjoy various movies. I mean, people always yell at me for enjoying Shang-Chi, but I thought, as a Wuxia fan, I'm like, okay, I loved it. It was fun. As a one-off, I liked Eternals. Do I think Eternals is a great movie? No. But I enjoyed it as a science fiction film. If it came out and was not part of the MCU and I watched it, I have problems with it, but I would have been like, it's pretty good. I would have liked Eternals the same way I like, say, Battle Beyond the Stars. Make that what you will. But you're right. I mean, you look at Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., maybe going back and looking at Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or Castle was a fun show. Castle knew what it was. Nathan Fillion he was great in the role. And that was, I mean, my God, I never watched Suits before. And I've gone back and I turn on Suits and I'm like, well, that wasn't network. It wasn't network as like ABC, NBC, or CBS, but it was another great show. There's lots of great shows. Monk, great show. Psych, great show. There's all these shows that are really, really good that live up to their premise every week. And, yeah, it's interesting. Like, how much do these Marvel shows cost? Why are these Marvel shows so expensive? How come the writing is so... She-Hulk might be one of the most disappointing TV shows I've ever seen in my life. And I was primed for it. You have John Byrne's comic run. Just do that. Why don't you do that? I don't know. Let's see. Where were we? Euler's Workshop says, this is why I quit my last job and started my own company. The new owner had never done the work we were doing, and I could see within a few days he was going to destroy the company. And a year later he did. Euler's Workshop, I couldn't have said it better myself. Amazing. I mean, it's amazing to me. Look, here's what's fucking crazy, and I know this about Warner Brothers. So at Warner Brothers, I mean, I joke on our Let's Get Physical Media show, but so I guess it was it this year? I think it was this year. So they released The Lost Boys and Poltergeist. Warner Brothers did. The cover art, the original cover art for Poltergeist and The Lost Boys, whoever made them clearly had never seen the fucking movies. Now, this is a company that's making movie advertising. They're making packaging for Poltergeist and The Lost Boys. Now, first of all, let me describe The Lost Boys, the original key art for The Lost Boys. And if you ask any woman who saw The Lost Boys in 1987, she knows who Billy Worth is. She knows who Billy Worth is. Do you know who Billy Worth is? Maybe you don't. But if you ask anyone, any female that saw The Lost Boys, probably some dudes too, that saw The Lost Boys in 1987, those ladies will tell, oh, Billy Worth. So the original Lost Boys key art was kind of a desaturated, all the characters, you know, you had like Michael's kind of looking this way, and you have all the vampires in a stark red background. Fine, you know, it's Photoshop cover, it's not painted art or anything, but it's kind of iconic. You know, if you saw it, there's your 4K cover. Anybody who's going to buy The Lost Boys on 4K wants that cover. So you look at it and go, yep, that's Lost Boys. Even the font, the way Lost Boys is written, is iconic. Same with Poltergeist. Black and white art, all black. The TV, Carol Ann, hands on the TV. They're here with the cool Poltergeist logo. That's all you have to do in 4K. If you look at the original cover for both The Lost Boys and Poltergeist, somebody was hired by Warner Brothers, whether it's an outside agency or whomever was doing these covers. Don't know what the fuck. They'd never seen these movies. And you look at this and you're like, why? And then the studio puts it out because no one at the studio knows either. And you look at this and you're like, who the fuck made these choices? I mean, seriously, this is what you're selling. You're selling this on 4K. You're catering to a collector's market. These are people that are going to buy. It's horror. So anything horror, sci-fi, fantasy will sell first because that's the collector's market. If you're selling something, how do the studios are putting this stuff out? And they give you this substandard bullshit. And you know what that says to me? It says to me that whoever did the packaging, not only the people that did the packaging, but the people at the studio that approved the packaging, do not know what the fuck they're doing. And you ask, why are you, whoever approved this shit, why are you working at the studio? How'd you get your job? You know how they got their job? I'll tell you how they got their job. They got their job because somebody was working for Pepsi or Coke, or somebody was working for fucking McDonald's. Somebody was working in marketing. Now, corporations like, well, if this person worked in marketing, they have a tremendous marketing background. They've only marketed food products, but it doesn't matter because it's really the same thing. Somebody who understands packaging on goods and services, we'll just hire them here at Warner Brothers because our properties and our products are no different than Coca-Cola. This is what America is. It's happening at every level. Because the corporations just look at like, oh, this person worked in marketing at 5 different companies. Well, those 5 different companies might be making things that are completely unrelated to the movies or the movie business, but they'll get hired anyway because they came from another big corporation. This is the problem. And then you have people working at the studios on every level that do not know anything about the product that they're selling. Look no further than the people that run Warner Home Video, not Warner Archive, not people like George Feltenstein, whose institutional knowledge dwarfs. You'd need 30 people in Hollywood. I don't even know if you could find 30 people collectively that would know as much as one George Feltenstein. Thank God he's at Warner Brothers. But the people that are in charge of the theatrical releases, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And they have no idea, especially when it comes to releases on home video. And how many mistakes have been made on big releases. I talk about physical media, but the studios are full of people that are not qualified to work there. And that's something that no one's really talking about. But it's happening on every level. And not only that, there are a lot of people that are getting hired for other reasons than their knowledge of product, and that is having a wildly detrimental effect that no one wants to talk about, because that's a whole other issue. But people who are unqualified for whatever reason are getting hired into positions where either their corporate resume makes it so another corporation feels that, oh, they're worthy. They were at Coke. Let's have them make the Lost Boys cover. I mean, it's just, I can't even, it's baffling to me. Look no further, right? You want to, here, I'll give you an example that's happening right now. If you were to type in The Exorcist and hit images, you would see one of the most iconic key art images in all of horror film history. It's a scene from the movie where Max von Sydow gets out of a car in front of Chris McNeil's house and the light is shining down on him. They use it on the poster. It took Owen Roisman, the cinematographer, 2 days to light that scene. Everybody can look at that and go, that's The Exorcist. Now, if you look up on Amazon, Exorcist 4K release, which is a beautifully done release, sold out at Amazon. I didn't get it, 2000, because the people who work at Warner UK are fucking dope and they know everything about their product. In America, look up the Exorcist 4K, not the special edition. Look up the Exorcist 4K disc. Look at what they decided to go with as the cover. Some fucking numbnuts made that cover, and then a bunch of other numbnuts said, yeah, let's go with that. One of the worst covers, same thing at Paramount, Rosemary's Baby. Same thing. To me, Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby are two of my favorite horror films, or psychological thrillers. Call them what you want. Exorcist is a horror film. Maybe Rosemary's Baby isn't. But they both suffer from the same problem. Fucking idiots decided the key art, whatever the new key art, where they're going to use on their discs. And you wonder, who hired those fuckheads? Like, I'll flat out say it. They're fuckheads. Whoever hired them, and then multiple, a whole strata of fuckheads approved that stuff, looked at it and said, yeah, do you know why? Because they don't know what those fucking movies are. Those idiots haven't seen Rosemary's Baby. They don't know what it is. I mean, they don't. And you see this happening all the time. Why? Because this is how corporations hire. And corporations are not what made the movie business. What made the movie business were maverick individuals who knew things. They came from their gut. Corporations don't work that way. Corporations are the antithesis of how movies and television that are great get made. And now that our businesses are being controlled by corporations, that's why they're thinking these strikes might go on, because, I mean, even the producers who are now more ensconced with the corporations now, it's not going to work out. When it comes right down to it, you're working in the arts, buddy, and you cannot make money with movies the way you would through, say, real estate or whatever. And another problem is, if you look at how corporations, how America is being run, profit, the maximizing of profit is not exactly leading to the best business practices. What's great about streaming is streaming allows studios to have an income stream, a guaranteed income stream they did not have before. Whether it's $1 billion a month, what you got to do is figure out how that steady income stream can be used to bolster your theatrical market. Every time people say, oh, the theatrical market is dead, Barbie made over $1 billion in 3 weeks. Actually, less than 3 weeks. Oppenheimer. I mean, Christopher Nolan as a brand. And if you look at Christopher Nolan, here's something else about Christopher Nolan people tend to forget. Christopher Nolan was groomed to be a great director by Warner Brothers. And groom, I say groom, not as a bad word. But what I'm saying is that he made 2 independent movies. He made Following, and then he made Memento, which was a great indie film, still really intriguing, one of his best movies. Those 2 movies brought him to the attention of Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers saw this as a talented filmmaker. Rather than give him a remake of, say, RoboCop, which was such a Paul Verhoeven film, they had him remake a fairly unknown movie in the United States, which was Insomnia, which was star-driven here in America, and Christopher Nolan brought his acumen and was able to turn Insomnia into a viable studio movie. Worked well within the system, worked well with movie stars, and show that he could do it. what does Warner Brothers do? They give him another shot. Warner Brothers was really good at this. So they go, hey, man, Batman's moribund. Last time we had Batman and Robin, what would you do with it? He makes Batman Begins. Completely resurrects that franchise. And then smartly, okay, well, what do you want to do? He makes an adaptation of The Prestige. People say one for them, one for me, one for them, one for me. But Nolan ran his career. He makes The Dark Knight. And then he goes and makes Inception. Even Warner Brothers, the marketing people at Warner Brothers said, no one understood Inception. Our marketing is what sold that film. No, what sold the movie is that it was great. It provided a great experience at the movie theaters. That's what people want. The problem is people in corporations, they don't know what makes that happen. They can't recognize, they don't know the difference between a good story and a bad story. Corporations do not know how to make films. You need people at the studios, if in fact you want to be in that business, who understand what's going on. AT&T destroyed Warner Brothers' great relationship with Christopher Nolan. Universal's reaping the benefits. Warner Brothers got to make Dunkirk. Oppenheimer's outgrossing it. If you had been told there's no other director in Hollywood could have gotten Oppenheimer made. I don't care what anyone ever tells you. Christopher Nolan, with his track record, if Christopher Nolan hadn't made Dunkirk, that turned out to be a global hit, $500 million, about a World War II thing that's predominantly a British story, worked around the world. Christopher Nolan has been cultivated by Warner Brothers and by the Warner Brothers management. They allowed him to grow and flourish under their system. That's how Hollywood should work. Filmmakers now should be allowed to work, and they have to be partners with the studios. They used to know how to do that. They don't anymore, and it's a bummer. Anyway, that was Euler's Workshop. Let's see. RRTNZ says, our friend RRTNZ says, Chuck Norris has never cheated death. He always wins fair and square. Cheers, Rob. Say there's this show called Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Just taking the piss. Hope you're well. Cheers. Yeah. Strange New Worlds. Where are those Strange New Worlds? Star Trek Strange New Worlds is a show that's about Star Trek. That's it. That's all it's about. I would love to see a Star Trek episode that dealt with something like Peter Watts' Blindsight. What if the Enterprise were to encounter an alien race that they could not communicate with because they were intelligent but they had no consciousness? That would make for an interesting hour of TV. Not that anyone who work on Strange New Worlds could write something like that, but it would be interesting. BK Dan says, Rob, to paraphrase and answer Measure of a Man, does AI have a soul? No. In my opinion, AI can have a brain, but no mind. The mind is where the soul comes from. You could very well be correct. And I think, look, the thing is, it's artificial intelligence right now is sort of, it's a misnomer. It's not what's going on until the singularity occurs. Ray Kurzweil's Singularity. And by the way, everybody should read his book, The Singularity is Near, because it's fascinating. If you don't know who Ray Kurzweil is, dig into, I know he's kind of become, people think he's a loon because he's looking for life extension, but who doesn't want to live forever? I certainly do. But read his book, The Singularity is Near. It's very, very interesting. Artificial intelligence is a really interesting idea. What we have now are programs that can duplicate things that have already been done. And that's really distressing because, again, corporations, let's cut out the middleman. It's like Peter Gallagher in The Player. Robert Altman's The Player. That, well, if we got rid of the writers, we'd really have something. You put Jimmy Smits in it, and you have a sexy stand and deliver. Get rid of the writers. They've been wanting to get rid of the writers forever in Hollywood. The writers are the people that come up. The writers are the soul of everything that you watch, that you've ever loved. It was a writer who was the soul of that. And a great director was able to make sure that that soul was conveyed to the audience. But you needed the writer to come up with that soul in the first place. But good call on Measure of a Man. Great episode. By the way, if you have the Blu-ray of the physical media of Season 2 of Next Generation or the complete box set, there is an extended version of Measure of a Man that's 13 minutes longer than the broadcast episode, which I helped bring to light. RRTNZ says, also, Critical Drinker's R&B shout-out on the Russell Brand show. Nice. I got to thank him for that, by the way, today. Yeah, that was really nice. The Drinker, I had said, and I believe this utterly, I had said that the currency of the 21st century for an individual is going to be authenticity. Truth, honesty, call it what you want, but ultimately being authentic. And that, I believe, in our AI-addled world where we're going to have deep fakes and no one's going to know what's true. I'll tell you who's going to know things that are true. You'll know if I'm being my authentic self. What you see is what you get. I'm certainly not perfect. And if you want to dig up dirt on me, I'm sure you probably can't. But I can't deny it because it's probably all true. Some of it isn't, but I can prove that it's not. But being your authentic self is all anybody's going to have. And I think that is going to be the currency of the 21st century moving forward. And so when I said that, the Critical Drinker said that on the Russell Brand show. Russell's got 6 million subscribers, and that was really nice of him to say. And he quoted me. And I'll tell you something. The Drinker was being authentic by crediting me. That's being authentic. So I appreciate that. Zachary Zabali says, my favorite horror films are The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Dawn of the Dead. Those are 2 or 3 great. First of all, my 2 are Exorcist and Dawn of the Dead. Those are my favorite horror films of all time. Texas Chainsaw is one of the best horror films of all time. It's just not one of my favorites because it's hard to watch, but it's fantastic. And I mean, it's incredible. By the way, Second Sight, my beloved Second Sight, who is putting out Possession, they've been showing us the progress on their Hitcher set, which I cannot wait to buy. They say it might be coming out in February. They put out the definitive Dawn of the Dead and Texas Chainsaw sets. If you can get those, if you have the means, pick them up because they're fantastic. My other, I think Rosemary's Baby is absolutely up there in terms of John Carpenter's The Thing, up there. But there's so many horror films that I love. That are you know, I wouldn't necessarily say they're on, like Bride of Frankenstein has to be on my Mount Rushmore of movies. And then there are other things that I wouldn't necessarily recommend because I don't think people would like them as much as me, like Mario Bava's Black Sunday, The Wicker Man, Phantasm I love. But, you know, they're not for everyone. But I do think Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Dawn of the Dead are right up there, Zachary. Those are great. Tom Jr. Jackson says, I started watching The Fall Guy on Prime last night, and I really enjoyed it. At CinemaCon, we saw a long extended preview of the Fall Guy movie with Ryan Gosling that looks amazing. I'm not going to say it could be Barbie of next year. I don't know when it's coming out, but it looks amazing. I like The Fall Guy. It was great. So yeah, Darth Maylock says, hi Rob, with the studios basically shunning special features on DVD and Blu-rays, I'm fearful that the boutique labels like Shout, Arrow, Vinegar Syndrome, etc., Second Sight, 101, 88 Films, Turbine will not be around in 10 years. Physical media for life. Oh, I hate to say this, but I agree with you. And not only do I agree with you, I also think that they're going to run out of things to put out. Like, how many times can movies be remastered? And the things that aren't already out are getting more obscure as you go along. But until then, and also, who's going to make players? I mean, I'm scared to death that eventually there's very few people even making 4K players now. So, which is too bad. So I feel like I should spend some money and buy some high-end players and put them away for a rainy day because, you know, my time on this planet is finite, and hopefully, as I've been rearranging my disc collection, I'm just thinking I just need to get through the next couple of decades. But yeah, I think unfortunately you're right. Physical media will go away, and the danger for me of that is that if everything is based on metrics, there's so many movies out there that there's going to be a certain small percentage of things that everybody's going to watch, and then all of the great cult titles and the weird movies and all the things that have been made in cinema history that aren't the top 10 are going to be eliminated. People are going to say the way I was shocked. I looked up an article. I was shocked at how many movies Disney that I'd never even heard of have taken off their streaming service, which is crazy. Movies that, what are they, gone forever? But yeah, they won't be around in 10 years. Alon Abadi, Elon, how are you, Elon? Shalom. I finally got to Oppenheimer. Got a new job, no time. Robert Downey Jr. should be considered for an Oscar for it. Fantastic movie, all 3.5 hours of it. Alon, I think you're going to see that. You're going to see that movie's gonna sweep at the Oscars. Sweep. And I think, although I hope they're going to be probably dividing the acting accolades between, because people are going to get nominated multiple. You're going to have like 3 or 4 people nominated for Best Supporting Actor. But I totally agree with you. BrownTownReviews says, I love Chris Terrio's rant on marketing team making the name Batman v Superman. He thought that name sucked. BVS should be worse than it is. Meddling. Does anyone remember the no jokes mandate Warner Brothers had? Look, again, you have people, you have executives that are making decisions about a Batman Superman movie. Now, first of all, they're already fearful at the time. The Kevin Tsujihara, the regime at Warner Brothers, led by Kevin Tsujihara, they wanted to cash out and get their AT&T bonuses. Kevin Tsujihara was fucking a chippy on the side. There's all kinds of the last thing in the world's their head was not in the game, and you wound up with a lot of, they looked at Batman v Superman. They decided, well, it can't be 3 hours. It's got to be 2.5 hours. A lot of decisions that where do you get that from? Well, conventional wisdom says that a movie has to be this long. Well, does it? What has there ever been a Batman v Superman movie that was 3 hours long? Look, I'm not saying that Batman v Superman is perfect, but I'll tell you one thing, that the ultimate edition of that movie is way better than the theatrical version, and they should have released that longer version. It would have been much more satisfying, but they didn't. Just like they should have let Zack Snyder finish Justice League. They would have made a lot more money. But, again, here's a truism. Maybe it's just my truism. No one ever got rich and successful following a trend in Hollywood. You get rich and successful setting trends in Hollywood. You make a successful movie, then everybody wants to follow you, copy you. But you can't achieve that great success. I'm sure people are looking at, like I said before, every toy company is being like, well, we could make our own Barbie. Nope. There's only one brand like Barbie. And I joked I was waiting to see the Gnip Gnop movie. But the more I think about it, I have a pretty good story for a Gnip Gnop movie. So if you're interested in Hollywood, come a-callin', because let me pitch your story, and I'll find an A-list writer, and we'll crush that Gnip Gnop script. It'll be awesome. So, hey. But, yeah, BrownTownReviews, right there with you. And Darth Maylock, bad news. Zachary Zabali says, why don't they sell special editions on Prime, for example, like the Lord of the Rings extended edition with the hours of features? Seems like it would generate profit. No. Oh, it would. Well, here's another thing. Okay, here's another thing. The Lord of the Rings special features were finished in standard def. You can't remaster them into 4K because we shot them at NTSC resolution. That's 480 by 640. That's how they were shot. You can upscale them and make them. A lot of companies do. My own Usual Suspects documentaries that I produced with Carrie David and Dave Parker, they were upscaled for the Kino Lorber Usual Suspects disc. They're watchable. The content is there. They don't even know. My feature-length documentary on the making of Tron should be on Disney+. I mean, I know it's self-serving. I did direct it, and I edited that documentary and all the interviews that I did, except I didn't do Cindy Morgan because I wasn't in Chicago. Shout out to Jennifer Weigel for that interview. But why isn't that on Disney+? 88-minute documentary on the making of Tron. It's one of my favorite things I ever made. It's not on Disney Plus because it's in standard def. They have all of this programming, but in people's minds, They don't think about that. They just don't even, and they most of the time they don't even fucking know. They don't know what special features are. They don't know what special features exist. It's crazy. I mean, you could take all of the raw footage, just the raw interviews that we did, hours and hours of interview. I did a 5-hour interview with Christopher Lee just for Fellowship of the Ring. And I think the disc represents 10 minutes of that interview. You think people wouldn't want to watch that interview? Turn them all into podcasts. Put them up on Spotify. It's crazy. But yeah, Zachary Zabailey, I would love to have done that. Dan Candy says, Rob, when you had access to the archives, how much Phase 2 stuff did you see? Anything interesting that hasn't been released? I believe you're talking about Star Trek Phase 2. No, I put it all on the Season 2, everything that was there. You've seen everything that was there. There's artwork that survived, pictures of the original Enterprise model, the Lost Years, the Reeve Stevens book on Phase 2, Star Trek The Lost Years, essential book, has breakdowns of all the stories. There really isn't that much stuff that survived, unfortunately. I wish there was more. But the Reeve Stevens book is pretty definitive. Star Trek The Lost Years, I think it's called Lost Years, the Phase 2 series. Get that book. That's pretty much, for me, the definitive book. So, yes. Now, I did have a... you know what I want to do now? Because I haven't done it yet. Letters. I got a few letters. And if you want to send me a letter, right down there, right underneath where you see my name, letters. I love getting letters from people. And allow me to give you a letter or two. Let's see what people... There's some pretty funny ones, actually. Modern Star Trek. This comes from Jermaine K. Jermaine K says, Hello, Rob. I hope you're having an awesome week. Quick question for you before getting into the letter. Should the MCU have followed up the snap with the mutant X gene and all of that entails instead of a multiverse? Probably. I say yes, and I will write a future letter expanding on my reasoning. I think it might have been a good idea, but I agree with you. But I'll wait for your future letter to opine further. I agree with you, Rob. The current versions of Star Trek are not good. To be frank, they're awful. And I genuinely believe that is the point. Star Trek, in my opinion, is being controlled by people who dislike the franchise. Not only that, but they seem to have an open disdain for it. Star Wars is unfortunately in the same boat. They're being mocked in subtle and not too subtle ways. Are the writers younger people who want to tear down something that their parents and grandparents loved so their thing can be elevated? Maybe. I think it's a type of cultural moral arrogance. They don't feel Star Trek has anything to say to them. They're beyond Star Trek now. It's hubris, stupidity, and cultural, not all at once. Dave Cullen touches on this a lot in his videos. Unfortunately, it's not changing anytime soon. Thanks and take care. Well, one thing, I love Dave Cullen's videos. He often gives me shouts out, and I think Dave Cullen's videos, I've been watching his channel for years, and I've really loved his Star Trek commentary, and he's done some other social commentary that's really compelling as well. I really enjoy his channel. But yeah, look, I think, here's the thing. Here's what I think in a nutshell, without going off on a rant. I know people are like, Rob's going to go off on a Star Trek rant. No, I'm not going to go off on a Star Trek rant. I'm going to say the problem with Star Trek overall is you have people like Mike McMahon, who created Lower Decks. He loves Star Trek, but he loves Star Trek as somebody from the outside looking in. And it's like a lot of TV writers. Star Trek is not being taken, it is being looked at and looked back upon as this artifact from the 60s that is campy, silly, funny, and a lot of the elements from Star Trek, like Spock himself, Tribbles, the Mugatu, the Gorn, they have been, through pop culture itself, through the 57 years that Star Trek has existed, you cannot take them seriously. And when you look at something, Mike McMahon's very good at this, all of Star Trek is wink, wink, nudge, nudge. He's not, as I've said before, he's not inside Star Trek. He is incapable of he can tell a Star Trek story he's making a show about people that have watched Star Trek. Lower Decks is a show that's literally about Star Trek fans, and it might as well be a work. It's Big Bang Theory. It's supposedly set in the Star Trek universe, and occasionally they're actually telling decent Star Trek stories. But what you're watching is basically an editorial about the Star Trek franchise. But Strange New Worlds can't get out of its own way. Strange New Worlds is only about itself. There hasn't been I haven't seen one attempt, I mean, maybe when they're ripping off Ursula K. Le Guin in the first season. But, I mean, why am I watching a Star Trek musical that's about the romantic entanglements of the cast? Why is that even a story? Who cares? Why is Spock, jumping from T'Pring to Nurse Chapel? What is that? First of all, it's a bastardization of his character. And what does it have to do with science fiction, action, adventure, allegory, storytelling? Nothing. I keep waiting for Star Trek to tell me an interesting science fiction story. It's not. It's so far up its own Star Trek ass. And then they just willy-nilly change things because they think they're like, oh, the Gorn, because the Gorn now can play video games in a TV commercial with William Shatner. So, hey, let's do something cool. Let's make the Gorn formidable by turning the Gorn into the aliens from the Alien franchise. Let's turn them into xenomorphs. Well, okay, one, that's a dumb idea because that's not original. If you turn the Gorn into something original and maybe extrapolated, I mean, let's face it, they don't know this, but you saw a Gorn in an animated series episode called Time Trap. They don't know that. If you were to ask them, did you know that the Gorn appeared in that? They wouldn't know. Why? Because they haven't watched the animated series. Why? Because they think, oh, it's not real. Even though it was written by many of the original writers of the original series, and most of the cast returned. They don't know that. They probably don't know that you saw Gorn in A Mirror Darkly, the 2-part Enterprise episode. So they fixated on the Gorn. The Gorn's a perfect example. What they've done with the Gorn in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, first of all, canonically, they shouldn't even know who the Gorn are. So they're not paying attention to their own show. And second of all, they've turned them, they think they're being clever by taking the Gorn and turning them into this formidable force. One, that's dumb because they've completely turned the Gorn. Star Trek doesn't have villains per se. They have antagonists. And what we're going to see tonight, oh, I can't wait. In 90 minutes, I get to watch Hegemony, and even that, they think they're so clever. Hegemony. It was never really spoken of canonically, but if you go to Memory Alpha, the Gorn Hegemony. Yeah, I'm with you, buddies. I get what you're doing. I see you. But they're not writing, they can't stop or help but writing self-reflexive stories about Star Trek. And I keep waiting. Strange New Worlds this season, in my mind, has not told one Star Trek story. It's only told Star Trek stories about Star Trek. But we haven't gone to any really strange new worlds. We've gone back to worlds we've already been to. And referenced other Star Trek shows. Or Toronto. You want to go? No offense. I love Toronto, but hey, yeah, not good. Not good. This letter comes from McCready's computer. McCready's computer is a cheating bitch, and we all know that. This comes from Lost Trekkie. Actually, this comes from McCready's computer, and the subject heading is Lost Trekkie. Hi, Rob. Growing up, I gravitated to Trek stories because of how heady they were versus Star Wars, which I also love. But as I've gotten older, Trek has stuck with me more. It pains me to see what J.J. Abrams started. Akiva and Alex have continued in trying to put the fantastical spin on Star Trek that no one asked for. Who is this shit for? What is the point of Discovery and Strange New Worlds? What stories are they trying to tell? I honestly do not know. All they're telling is derivative Star Trek stories, and then they're telling stories that would be at home on... It's all Buffy the Vampire Slayer. All those writers grew up watching Buffy, thinking that's the pinnacle of fantasy programming. You had a story... Buffy the Vampire Slayer was brilliant in its conceit. Joss Whedon's brilliant conceit that you're telling a high school story about the trials and travails of high school, the relationships, the ups and downs, except your high school's in a town where there's a hellmouth. And so you've got a whole horror fantasy sheen to it, and you can add that into the teen angst. Well, they've done exactly the same thing, but with Star Trek. Instead of a Hellmouth, they're on the Enterprise, and now we're getting a soap opera show. The Star Trek musical was it was about the demise of 3 romantic relationships they'd set up earlier in the series. I would ask you, who the fuck cares? Why are you telling stories about interpersonal romances on a starship in Star Trek? Where's a Star Trek story? Where's a story about 2 planets that are using computers to wage war rather than actually shoot at each other? Where's the story about a doomsday machine? Where's the story about neural parasites that go from planet to planet, take over the population to have them build ships that allow these things to go further into the galaxy? Where is any science fiction story ever in any episode of Star Trek that we've seen in the modern day? It's all garbage. But anyway, I'm sorry. Let me continue. What is the point of Discovery and Strange New Worlds? What stories are they trying to tell? Because I haven't got a fucking clue. They lack imagination. Spock is now a simp? I no longer know the son of Sarek and Amanda. Can we please get people that have a basic understanding of the original series leading these shows? Have they seen Amok Time, Mirror Mirror, or Devil in the Dark? How can people who loathe Star Trek Abrams, or at least don't understand it, Akiva and Alex, be allowed to bastardize the history we all know and love? Well, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. They negotiated these deals, especially Kurtzman and J.J. Abrams, back when they made Star Trek 09. And I hate all modern Star Trek. I really do. It's ironic that Prodigy was probably the best modern Star Trek show, but it was conceived of for kids, and it didn't have a human crew. It was like, we're going to do Guardians of the Galaxy in the Star Trek universe. I get it, but it turned out story-wise to be the most sci-fi Star Trek-y of all of them, really. Jesus, tap dancing Christ, is it fucking depressing. I go to my shrink, and instead of talking about all my neuroses, I rant about Star Trek. At home, while my lady friend and the dogs leave the room when I start my running commentary each week, watching Strange New Worlds, she tells me that I need to rant to someone else but her and the pups. Why do I punish myself? Akiva Goldsman talent equates to an inflamed taint in 100% humidity during the summers of the Deep South. That's a picture. Before I shove off this mortal coil, my only wish is that we finally get a Star Trek show with peak verisimilitude, to borrow one of your common phrases. I did start Picard because I'd heard the 3rd season is excellent. It better be, because these first 2 seasons have been a shit show too. Oh, indeed they are. What have they done to Q? What is this Voyage Home callback bullshit that leads nowhere? God rest her soul, but Annie Wershing is playing the Borg Queen like some quippy Judd Apatow character, I know, and not the cold-hearted Quim we knew and love from TNG and First Contact. I don't blame her, because I'm sure this is the direction she received by asshats who wouldn't know Borg if it hit them in the face. You're right, Rob, these people haven't a clue, and there is clearly no plan. Anyway, I love the show. Keep it up. You're one of the few I actually tune in for consistently. Quick question. Do you think anyone will ever be able to coax John Carpenter out of retirement? One last go at it? The last truly proper Carpenter film was Ghosts of Mars. His Masters of Horror episodes are killer, but the less we say about The Ward, the better. I just want one more good Carpenter flick. It doesn't even have to be stellar. Give me Kurt Russell in an eye patch or a tank top and roll with it one last time. Peace, brother. That comes from McCready's Computer. McCready's Computer, I feel you. And again, John Carpenter, he was, I think, tired of being abused by the box office and by the critical community. He'll tell you, you listen to him in interviews and things, his career, he started great, and he's always, some of my favorite films of his, I love Prince of Darkness. I think Prince of Darkness is one of his great movies. It's also one of his best soundtracks. I loved In the Mouth of Madness. Even Mike DeLuca, who now runs Warner Brothers, Mike DeLuca wrote In the Mouth of Madness, and he was not a big fan. I really liked it. Do you read Sutter Kane? Yes, I do. But I love John Carpenter. I'd love to see him make A Little Trouble in Big China. You know, maybe go to China and make a movie. I don't know. I'd love to see it happen. I don't know if it will. Carpenter's in his 70s now, and I think he's content to watch basketball and play video games and play music. You know, he goes on tour with his son, playing the Lost Themes album. That's not such a bad thing. We've got a lot of great Carpenter movies, and I'm a huge fan. A huge, huge fan. This one comes from Jamie. Jamie writes, Rob, while Star Trek Discovery, Puke Hard, and strange new ripoffs need to be shoved into their own reality simulation, delaying the eugenics wars doesn't accomplish the task. That retcon happened decades ago. Space Seed established that the eugenics wars is the Third World War and was retconned to be much later, as far back as Encountered Farpoint. Well, Jamie, that's a pretty astute thing, but I've had these conversations before. You know, if you watch Space Seed, when McCoy hears the eugenics wars, when they start talking about genetically engineered Supermen seizing power, McCoy's like, the eugenics wars. I never thought, because they don't talk about Khan being a tyrant who launched military campaigns against his neighbor. I got the idea that the men that seized power and the women that seized power were trying to make a better world, and it was the other people that went after them. I didn't think that it was necessarily a world war. So even though we'd never heard about the nuclear horror of World War III until Encounter at Farpoint, I don't have a problem with that, because I think the eugenics wars at the time of The Next Generation took place at the same time. But I understand where you're coming from. I feel you. And this from the delightful Science Lady. Hi, Rob. Are you a big theater fan? One of my favorite plays I watched years ago was Don Carlos, and it starred Derek Jacobi as Prince Philip II. Okay, first of all, Science Lady, let me tell you, and for all of you out there, one of my very favorite things I've ever watched that I think has ever been broadcast on TV is I, Claudius, starring Derek Jacobi as Claudius. If you guys, Patrick Stewart's in there, John Rhys-Davies is in there, Brian Blessed's in there, my beloved Sean Phillips, Livia, oh my God, one of the greatest villainesses of all time. If you people, and I mean you people, what do you mean you people? I mean you people. If you haven't seen I, Claudius, what's wrong with you? Now, I understand it was made for the BBC and it was shot on videotape, so it looks like a soap opera. I know. So it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I get it. It's like you're watching a play, which basically you are. I, Claudius is to me, the godfather of TV. I mean, when I think about early things I loved, John Hurt as Caligula. If you guys haven't seen I, Claudius starring Derek Jacobi, what's wrong with you? Go get it. You can get it on DVD. Check it out. Anyway, let me start reading your letter again. Are you a big theater fan? One of my favorite plays I watched years ago was Don Carlos. By the way, this comes from my beloved Science Lady. One of my favorite plays I watched years ago was Don Carlos, and it starred Derek Jacobi as Prince Philip II. If you wanted to see great acting, that was it. He scared the shit out of me. I never understood why it was never made into a movie at the time. He would have won all the Oscars if it was played as it was in the theater. For years, I've tried to find out if anyone ever filmed the performance. It was so good, I would love to see it again. If I ever find it, I'll definitely send it to you. It's also an opera, so you know it's a tragedy. I don't know much about the opera, I only know a few. Surprisingly, you will find a lot of the metalheads into opera. But definitely, look up the play for yourself. It's a great story. Well, if Derek Jacobi was in it, Prince Philip II, and by the way, Science Lady, if you say I do it, I do it. You know, Science Lady's kind of like, do you guys remember the movie Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater? Great movie. Alan Moyle directed it. Love that movie. It's not one of the great teen comedies of the 80s, because I think it came out in 90. It might be 89. But the Eat Me, Beat Me lady. That's all I'm saying. So, Pump Up the Volume. Dance, Dance. That's a different Pump Up the Volume. But hey, actually it's not. It's the same. But I love hearing from Science Lady. So thank you for that. Let's see where people keep firing in the super chats, and let me find out where we're at here. I want to get people. I don't want to not be in the proper order received, and let's find that order. And here it is. Where was I? Let's Terrio's rant. BK Dan says, by the way, Rob, I'm stealing fuckheads. Too funny. Please, everything, Mikasa, Sukasa, everything I say on the show is yours. But credit me with the whole verisimilitude rants, even though I didn't make up the word, and the fact that I said about authenticity. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, I respect your tenacity with modern Star Trek so much. You keep holding on, hoping things will get better consistently again. I was a huge Star Wars fan, and I let it go after Episode 9, after being a fan for 15 years, and I now only watch the original trilogy. Power to you. It's interesting. Anonymous brings up an interesting point. People are like, well, Rob, if you hate modern Star Trek so much, why do you keep watching it? Because Star Trek has been a constant in my life since I was a little kid. And it's ebbed and flowed and grown and evolved. And I'll tell you something. I see modern Star Trek since 2009 as a metaphor for everything else wrong with modern society, American society, in a way. I think the decline of what Star Trek is, beginning with J.J. Abrams, the fact that J.J. Abrams, in every interview he gave when Star Trek 09 came out, he talked about how he wasn't a Star Trek fan. And it showed. And that Star Trek 09 has one of the dumbest villains in the history of villainy, who doesn't quite figure out, I'm back in time. The whole reason I'm mad, I can go solve my problem right now. And he never does. It's such... Star Trek 09 and Star Trek Into Darkness are two of the dumbest science fiction films. Plan 9 from Outer Space is more coherent than those movies. I understand they look good. The cast was good. They're all action-packed. Both of those movies are monumentally stupid. The plots are stupid. Everything about them is stupid. Nothing makes sense. And I wonder, I still, as somebody who sat in an edit bay for thousands of hours trying to make sense of things, I'm amazed that somebody actually sat in that edit bay and gave us those movies, much less shot those scripts. Don't understand them. But no, you're right. I mean, the same thing. The same man made Rise of Skywalker. Rise of Skywalker is also one of the worst big-budget science fiction movies ever made. I mean, as far as J.J. Abrams is concerned, Mission Impossible 3, because he's basically making a big-budget episode of Alias, he knew what he was doing. That's fine. It's fine. Mission Impossible 3 is fine, watchable. It's so weird. I was going through the Mission Impossible movies before I saw Dead Reckoning, and when you get to Mission Impossible 3, Ethan Hunt's trying to live a normal life. I mean, it's basically he's trying to be Alias. No one knows what he's part of. He was part of the Impossible Missions Force. He just took his ideas from TV and applied them to the Mission Impossible franchise. And you've got this great villain in Philip Seymour Hoffman, and then at the end he just gets hit by a car. I mean, I've never met J.J. Abrams. I'm sure he's a really nice guy, but my God, Star Trek Into Darkness, Super 8, Rise of Skywalker, and Force Awakens, all of those movies are collectively 5 of the worst science fiction films ever made. With the resources and the money, I'm fascinated by how those movies even got made. And Star Trek Into Darkness especially. Wow. Hey, once you can beam from your one-man attack ship in San Francisco to the Klingon homeworld, just beam there. It's like, yeah. That's magic, and that doesn't work or make sense. But the reason I continue to watch is because, to me, it's more anthropological. And I wonder, we have such great fantasy programming. I mean, I look at, House of the Dragon. You know what people want from Star Trek? I mean, I understand the people that really like modern Star Trek, it goes down easy. They grew up with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What real fans want, and I'm not saying that people aren't real fans, but what old school Star Trek fans want, we want a show that is a serious, entertaining, contemplative, modern take on. We have characters that are exploring the cosmos, and in doing so, exploring the human condition. And I don't mean a junior high relationship. I don't mean a character like Spock who breaks up with his fiancée and ends up jumping into the arms of Christine Chapel. I mean, I want to see a character that would never fraternize with his own fucking crew. I mean, give me a fucking break. Jesus Christ, I hate that. That's what we want. And I think that, God, modern Star Trek is so dumb. It's so dumb, and that's what makes me so angry. But it's a metaphor for how much of our culture has gone in a certain direction. And what I don't understand is who's watching this. I'd love to know what the actual numbers are. Where's the merch? Where's the pop culture footprint? What's really interesting is that all Strange New Worlds does is recycle the original Star Trek and do it badly. I mean, the last episode of the first season where they literally just ripped off Balance of Terror, and I'm sure they thought, well, they went back and did it in Deep Space Nine for the 30th anniversary when they made Trials and Tribulations. The thing is, Trials and Tribulations did a really interesting job of integrating Deep Space Nine into that actual episode itself. The riff on Balance of Terror didn't even understand what made Balance of Terror a great episode. And none of that worked, but hey, that's just me. Zachary Zabeli says, I really liked Ray Liotta's No Escape when it came out. Good cast. Did you dig it when it came out? Nobody ever mentions it. I did. So No Escape, or AKA Escape from Absalom, was directed by Martin Campbell. And if memory serves, it was produced by Gail Ann Hurd. And it's a cool prison break, futuristic, dystopian movie that Ray Liotta's in. I like it. I think No Escape's good. It makes a good double bill with something like Demolition Man. So if you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. Check it out. John Cross says, Rob, with the strikes going on affecting so many movies, do you think it's worth it to go to next year's CinemaCon? That's a really good question. I love CinemaCon. It's a lot of fun, but they've had to halt production of so many of these movies. I don't know what's going to be at CinemaCon next year. I really don't know. So, I would imagine it's probably going to be pretty sparse. I don't know if they're going to have a CinemaCon next year, but it's a bummer. But they might not. Yeah, I don't know. Our friend 200 Watt Studio says, Gene Roddenberry said, what is the story about? Must have a reason for being told. Discovery and Strange New Worlds are about nothing, just filling time. Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, here's what's really interesting to me. So tonight, I would imagine, in less than an hour, or actually it usually drops before 11, we're going to see an episode where the Gorns are killing people, and they've just decided to take the Gorn that were introduced in a really interesting episode. Here's something that I would point out about the Gorn. So the Gorn were originally introduced in the Star Trek episode Arena. And if you don't remember that episode, what has happened is Starfleet has established a base on a planet called Cestus 3. And the Cestus 3 outpost is destroyed, and the Gorns show from the very beginning they're very intelligent. They're masters of deception. They have lured the Enterprise there. And so they've destroyed the base, and it's one of the great Star Trek openings of all time when they beam down and you're in this great exterior, and the physical effects, there's real explosions going off, and it's really, really impressive. And then the Enterprise ends up pursuing the Gorn ship through space and to hunt it down. First of all, they don't know who they are, don't recognize the ship, they've never met the Gorn, they don't know anything. So already Strange New Worlds has completely violated canon, which, like, So Strange New Worlds has come along, and this is one of the things I hate about it. They're like, well, we like the Gorn, but they were introduced in the original series, and so, well, let's it doesn't matter. We'll just take them and use them, and, we gotta do more, so let's make them like the aliens. Star Trek needs aliens. They need xenomorphs. And let's life cycle. We'll just make it. We'll put the Gorn facehuggers on, and we'll just have them burst out of the bodies of humans. We'll just make them just like the xenomorphs in Alien because they're gross. Okay. Let's assume we're going to accept all that, even though I don't. How do you go from the Gorn as they were depicted in the original series and in Time Trap and in Through a Mirror Darkly? How do you go from the Gorn as they are depicted to being a proud spacefaring race that are that technologically advanced? And why are they using human beings to, no one, complete violation. And also it just makes the Gorn not, they truly are evil. They're evil animals, evil xenomorphs that are going to do evil, horrible things to human beings. So what do we have to do? Kill them. They've literally turned the Gorn. Now, why do I find that objectionable? One, it's easy and not creative. And they're ripping off Alien, and they're ripping off Star Trek. But what's really interesting about Arena, and I even thought about this when I was a kid watching it. I've said this before on the show. Yeah, okay. It's a man in the suit, and the Gorn speaking. All that was really very cool, though, and the fact that he doesn't move fast and all that is pretty interesting. The people who watch Strange New Worlds just look at Arena and go, that's silly. They're not in that episode. As soon as the Gorn shows up, it's like, oh my god, that's the green lizard monster Gorn that was on the TV commercial with Shatner. No one who watches Strange New Worlds, even Akiva Goldsman, who works on the show, takes it seriously. Nobody does. They're like, we could make these really formidable and evil. But here's the thing. In that episode, first of all, the Gorn, and this is going to seem weird, but the Gorn's wearing a tunic. The Gorn's wearing his gold outfit. The Gorn has fashion. That's their outfit. They've made clothes. Now, they have culture. And when the Gorn's talking to Kirk, the Gorn captain says, and I've said this before on the show, and this is an important point. The Gorn says he knows he's stronger, and in his mind, there's no way this puny little human's going to survive. Their ships aren't even as fast as ours. So the Gorn captain is trying to reason with Kirk when they're talking, and he says, listen, we can end this. I will be quick and merciful. So the Gorn knows. The Gorn is not some evil monster. He's just accepting the situation. These much more powerful aliens have set this up. I want to save my crew the way you want to save your crew, but you're not going to defeat me. So I have no desire to put you to a slow and painful death. I will be quick and merciful, which shows that there is a quality of mercy in the Gorn. And of course, then that script is flipped when Kirk spares the Gorn's life, and that's what causes the Metron to show up. But that episode is actually a very sophisticated episode. Those motherfuckers can't see beyond the fact that it's the Gorn in a suit. And all they see is a silly creature. Because they can't look beyond it. And so they've decided, I know exactly the thought process. They're like, okay, we're gonna update the Gorn, and we're gonna make them cool the same way xenomorphs and Alien are cool. You know what the thing is, though? They already were. And they already had a culture. And the idea was that Cestus 3 was a base that was built, and we encroached in their space. It would have been much more interesting. And also, by the way, if they were smart, they would have said, we can't use the Gorn because Arena is the first meeting between humanity and the Gorn. That's sacrosanct. But the people that are making Strange New Worlds don't give a fuck. And that's why I hate modern Star Trek. Because I have spent 50 fucking years of my life with the Gorn, or 45 years of my life, with the Gorn as part of my life. And that story meant something to me when I was 5. It meant something to me when I was 50. So for 50 or 45 years, I have loved that story. And these motherfuckers come along and fuck it all up. That's why I hate modern Star Trek. And it's like, Rob, what does it matter? Who cares? No one does that well, they did do it to Tolkien. But, when Denis Villeneuve is adapting Dune, he's not going with his French-Canadian ways. He's not, I could really improve the Fremen. And also the Padishah Emperor, and I'm going to go around and change everything. Well, you would never do that because you respect the work. You respect what's been done. The people that are making Strange New Worlds think that everything they do is better. And it isn't. But they don't know why. And I get people love it, but Jesus. Anyway, 200 Watt Studio. See, I feel like everyone's triggering me. It's like you're poking me, filling me with anti-Star Trek stuff. Zachary Zabali says, where would you rank Drag Me to Hell in Raimi's filmography? Underrated? I love it. My second favorite Raimi film after Spider-Man 2. Evil Dead, it's cool. Yeah, look, I think Sam Raimi is a great filmmaker, but don't sleep on movies like A Simple Plan or The Quick and the Dead. Even the XYZ Murders. But I like Drag Me to Hell. But, again, Drag Me to Hell it's much more of a pulp, kind of an EC Comics story. I prefer, that's why when I think about Dawn of the Dead and I think about The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby or Texas Chainsaw or Hellraiser or something, I like horror that is really pushing the boundaries of human experience, so to speak, but definitely good. Charles Davies Aiken says, as Brad Wright said, sci-fi rules matter. Universes rewrite rules. Star Trek used to propose moral questions that made us question right or wrong, like Tuvix or Duet. I agree. And you saw this episode a couple weeks ago where its moral underpinnings were dubious at best. And I understand they're trying to do a PTSD story, but I think what's really weird is the back half of this Strange New World season. I don't think it's really been earned. And in a way, it's kind of offensive. The way they've now incorporated an animated show that is a Star Trek farce that's actually commenting on Star Trek. They had a crossover episode where they really didn't have an interesting story to tell. They just did the crossover episode. The musical episode didn't have a science fiction story to tell. They had to rip off, they had to invoke, well, it's improbable. It's a subspace rift that deals in improbability. Once again, somebody saw Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Let's wear your influences on your sleeve. Let's not do something original. They could have done something really original. But in this episode, eventually, look, the Klingon boy band scene completely shatters the fourth wall. Makes absolutely no sense. But they do it anyway for a cheap laugh. And I get it because fans love their humor. But when I watch something like that, I'm looking at that going, wow, guys, you've turned the Klingons into a joke. The Klingons should be given within the context of that story. When they show up, if I had done that episode, I wouldn't have called it a rap battle. But at the end, it would have been really interesting to see the Klingons and the humans square off and start it like an MC battle. But then, like at the end of Day of the Dove, they work together to close the rift. But, those motherfuckers, they would never come up with something like that, which is a bummer. BK Dan says, oh, wait, hang on. No, I'm not at BK Dan. Bruce Lum says, hi, Rob, thanks for sharing your knowledge of Star Trek. I was mesmerized with the first 2 seasons of Star Trek, the original series, during the original broadcasts, watching them when I was 6. Though the third was more forgettable. Too bad about the latest series, except Picard Season 3. I agree. And this is what's so interesting to me. You have 57 years of Star Trek stories, and you have other shows like The Expanse or like David Icke and Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica. There's a lot of really interesting... Even Eric McCormack's produced show Travelers, which wasn't perfect, but for a time travel show, really pretty interesting. There's some really... Or my beloved Torchwood Season 3. I'd never seen the first 2 seasons of Torchwood. I watched the Season 3 Children of Earth. I was blown away. I mean, there's some amazing... Why isn't Star Trek a serious, thoughtful show? That doesn't mean you can't do Trouble with Tribbles or a piece of the action. But even those work within the context. You can do a humorous show that doesn't compromise your own program. And that's what they don't understand. The crossover with Lower Decks did. The Klingons showing up in that musical episode did. They completely shatter their own walls and their credibility. They don't know how to make a science fiction show. That's the thing. None of them do. They don't know because they don't know science fiction, which is a bummer. RRTNZ says, "Hail Rob, hope to see you back on the Mr. Brown stream soon. Suspect you're a closet Anglophile." Also, they asked me actually, got an idea. Gendy Tarkovsky adapts John Milton's Paradise Lost. Ooh, I'd watch that. That'd be great. I'd love to see that. That's actually a really good idea. BK Dan says, "Rob, what's your take on the Babylon 5 Blu-ray movie? That it's 4K actually. It recently came out. I don't have it yet. I'm going to get it. I can't wait to see it. I know it's a multiverse thing, but I'm just happy that it got made because I love Babylon 5. I can't wait to see it. Also, what do you think of Amazon wanting to do more Stargate? Stargate I know not much about, and I started watching it. I really enjoyed it. I've seen the first season of Stargate, of the first Stargate. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. There's a show that creates its own world and doesn't don't tell me if there's a musical episode. I'll discover that on my own, but I really liked it. I thought it was really good. But I think it'd be great, and I think if they get the right people to make it, it'll be a good show, which would be great. Coach sipping Jamba Juice out of a straw says, "You feel about Star Trek the exact same way I feel about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle franchise for the past 10 or so years." Well, I can I can understand that. It's just, for me, I'll tell you something. For me, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was, the comic started out as a parody of Frank Miller's Ronin. And those early issues, which I used to have and I don't have anymore, oh my God, I thought was really cool. And then there was a bunch of pretenders to the throne, like radioactive black belt hamsters and all that other stuff. So to me, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the live-action movie from, 1990, was a bastardization of the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic. But I understand your pain. I understand where you're coming from. Although I haven't seen the new movie. The new movie interests me. I don't know if it's any good. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Write me a letter. Write me a letter. Love to hear your take. Greggy Gilgen says, "Sir, looking good." Well, thank you. Keep chugging that water, bro. Well, I will. No, I have to say, you know, it's amazing what less bad food and less alcohol and just the secret of life apparently is to eat better, drink lots of water, and get some exercise. Who knew? No, but thank you. I feel good. You know, and drinking 10. Although I keep reading these horror stories about people that OD on water. It's weird. Yeah, 10 of these a day. I'm telling you. You feel good. There's a good question coming up. So thanks, Gregory. I appreciate that. Greggy. 200 Watt Studio says, "Can you imagine if Strange New Worlds did Darmok? What would their take on it be?" Oh my God. Darmok, a really interesting I think it's a better idea than it is an episode, 5th season episode of Next Generation. What's great about, Paul Winfield plays Captain Dathon, and he's an alien who speaks, their language is speaking in metaphor, which is really great, and him and Picard need to learn how to communicate to defeat an entity, a creature that's on this planet. It's a really, I think it's a really strong episode of Star Trek, but more importantly, it has a really great Star Trekian concept. And it delves into things like, it's not Arrival. And to me, okay, here's a good example. The movie Arrival with Amy Adams. That's the kind of stories I would like to see Star Trek doing. Not exactly that story, but that that's what to me, if someone said, Rob, give me an example of what you see Star Trek as, that kind of a story. And what you do is one of the crew, if you want to tell a personal story, one of the crew is mourning over the loss of a loved one or something. And that whole story is so, in my mind, what Star Trek should be doing. Movies like Arrival. Or even stories like, there's a really interesting low-budget sci-fi movie that stars one of the, Brendan, what's-his-face from Buffy, Coherence. That would have made a great Star Trek episode. It's a low-budget indie movie, and if you haven't seen it, don't read anything about it. And admittedly, it was made for very little money. But the idea behind it would make a great Star Trek story. And I find it so weird that I'm watching Star Trek and it's about Spock being turned human, which is like, what if he was turned full human? And no one thinks about the fact that how would that be any different for him? I mean, if you watch the episode Journey to Babel, Spock talks about how he chose to accept to live by the philosophy of being a Vulcan. His physiology doesn't have anything to do with it. And I don't think that people on Strange New Worlds understand that. Just because Spock is turned into a human, he's not going to suddenly eat bacon and be like, oh, it's so good. He could eat bacon whenever he wants to. And it would taste the same. They've made it like, well, the human taste buds are what? Because he's fully human, like bacon's going to taste suddenly different? No. Spock chooses to do things. They're a choice. He's not physiologically bound to not eat meat. It's a choice. It's a philosophy of living that he has chosen to live by. The same way that, if you think about it, in a way, the Vulcan adherence to logic is kind of religious in nature. Not in that it has a deity, but it is or I guess it's more like being a Shaolin monk or something. But they didn't get that. And when Spock gets turned into a human, it's just stupid. And then, of course, it's all in service of his mother-in-law. Couldn't you imagine the Star Trek equivalent of something like Coherence or Arrival? That's what Star Trek should be. Arrival is the kind of... That movie, if you could distill that movie down into a Star Trek episode, I'm not saying copy it, because, I can see somebody go, well, let's rip it off like they ripped off Run Silent, Run Deep for Balance of Terror. I don't think that that's what you should do. You know what I mean? Don't do that. But it could be a movie like that, and turning it into a Star Trek episode could be very moving. And that is so not where they're at. They're at Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They would much rather be telling, and I'm sure, I every time I watch Star Trek Strange New Worlds, I'm like, these people, all they want to do is write their fucking Starfleet Academy show. That's all they want to do is get Starfleet Academy. Why? Because that's the show they understand how to write. Teenagers. Yeah, well, kind of a bummer. But what would their take on a piece? 200-watt studio, they would make it dumb. And they wouldn't, the language, I don't know what the language would be. It'd be, I don't know. Again, if we get a movie about Project Hail Mary that Andy Weir wrote, that to me is a great Star Trek story. If you like classic Star Trek, I cannot recommend Project Hail Mary enough. Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, and he wrote, what's his other book? I forget his other book. Why am I drawing a blank on it? I'll remember it. But if you guys like science fiction and you like great stories, something that's fun and also moving, I cannot recommend enough. Go read Project Hail Mary. And if you don't know what it's about, don't read the back of the book. Don't read what it's about. Just get the story and start reading it. I guarantee you, if you read it for 15 or 20 minutes, you won't be able to put it down. I read the book in one day. It's incredible. Get it. It's so much fun. And they're supposed to make a movie out of it. And Ryan Gosling's supposed to be the guy starring in it. I hope it gets made. Lord and Miller are going to do it. Because it's to me, that's what Star Trek could be. But it's not, so... Never Lose Your Nerd says, hey, Rob, love you and want to know if you're looking forward to the Godzilla -1 movie coming here in December. Go, Godzilla forever. Well, hang on. I can't. It was here. Where did it go? I am a dyed-in-the-wool kaiju fan. This is the Criterion Godzilla set. I know it's got certain problems people bitch about. But come on, man. Come on. I can't wait to see Godzilla Minus One. I loved Shin Godzilla. I thought it was great. I can't wait. That trailer, just that, I mean, come on. Everything about, the people that, Toho knows what to do. They know what to do. And I can't wait. I saw the trailer and I'm like, I'm so in. One of my favorite movie-going experiences ever was going to see at the Chinese theater in Hollywood, the big Chinese, Grauman's Chinese Theater, now TCL, was going to see Godzilla Final Wars. And they brought the cast from Japan. And you had the stars, in kimonos and in typical dress. Going to see Godzilla Final Wars, it was all the nerds in LA, all the Godzilla fans. It was like you would have thought you were at a wrestling competition, the WWF. People were screaming, and when it was over, the entire theater, it didn't matter whether it was great or not. Although there are things in Godzilla Final Wars I think is great. When Man in Suit Godzilla defeats Roland Emmerich's Godzilla in Australia, and the controller's like, I knew that iguana eating lizard was no good, or whatever he says. It was like the greatest thing ever. And Keith Emerson did that score, whatever, right? The actors from Japan, they just, because the Japanese don't give that kind of praise. They were freaked out. I think they were worried until they realized that no, nothing good, nothing bad was going to happen, and then we were just appreciative. I've been a Godzilla fan my whole life. I can't wait. I cannot wait for that movie. It looks so good. I can't wait. I can't wait. Zachary Zabeli says, my mom keeps asking me to ask you about a 70s film called No Blade of Grass. I've never heard of it. She said she might stump you with it. Oh, I own it. Although I will say this, I only own it on DVD. And if memory serves, it's Warner Archive. You can get it. You can get it on DVD. I like No Blade. Again, No Blade of Grass is a literary adaptation. It's a literary adaptation. Let me see if it is Warner Archive. It is Warner Archive, but I think it's only on DVD. Yeah, it is only on DVD. But I mean, you can get the DVD for $10. So, yeah, it's it's a great, again, No Blade of Grass is a 70s dystopian thriller, and it is, I forget the book it's based on. I keep wanting to say it's Make Room, but that's Soylent Green. Anyway, ecological disaster, people trying to survive. It's pretty good. It came out, and I don't know it came out in I want to say 74. Hang on, now I need to know. Now I have to look it up. So I want to say 74 maybe. Well, it was released on DVD in 2012. Now I have to know. Hang on. Ecological disaster, people trying to survive. Oh my God, it's 1970. It's earlier than I thought. 1970, the same year as Colossus the Forbin Project. So yeah, you got to watch it. It's a pretty interesting, this clan of people set out to try and survive ecological disaster and a lot of bad people. But the 70s there was a couple of interesting things that came out of, like, I want to say it came out of Britain. No, I think of No Blade of Grass in the same breath. There's a couple of other movies that came out around that time, science fiction movies that not a lot of people know. One is a movie called ZPG, Zero Population Growth. And another movie is called The Final Program, that's based on Michael Moorcock's Jerry Cornelius books. So to me, like, okay, and then there's another one with Yul Brynner called The Ultimate Warrior. So No Blade of Grass kind of fits in there in that time. I didn't realize it was 70. That's earlier than I thought it was. I think ZPG might be 70, 71. But all of those are like really worth watching. Total dystopian sci-fi films. Final Program is not dystopian, but it fits in the same time. But check it out. Yeah, it's good. It's good. So yeah, it's No Blade of Grass. I don't know who the book's based on, but ecological disaster, people trying to survive. But it's good, and I have it right over there, and you can get the DVD for $10. So that's good. Check it out. I mean, there's so many. That's actually, go watch No Blade of Grass and watch ZPG, Zero Population Growth. And I want to say that I have both of those. I have the DVD, but I have ZPG on Blu-ray, and I don't know who put it out, but it's definitely out there, so you can watch it. But tell your mom I hope she's not mad that she didn't stump me, but I do own it. Stargate SG-1 did a Break the Fourth Wall episode, except it was made to show the characters poking fun. See, I don't mind when that breaking the fourth wall stuff happens when it's done correctly. But to me, even within, let's go with that Star Trek musical episode. You have this improbability subspace field and all that. That Klingon interlude when you see the BTS boy band or whatever they're supposed to be singing in auto-tune, that completely shattered even the musical premise. They're actually, I was kind of buying into the musical premise, and then when they throw the Klingons in there, it just became a joke. And I was like, why do you have to do that? Why do you have to turn it into a joke? Why not make it cool? I don't know. It really bothered me. Jason S. says, I love the original Twilight Zone and Star Trek, the original series. I do too. As a matter of fact, the original Star Trek and the original Twilight Zone, people might ding me for this or find this surprising. I rate the original Twilight Zone. It's different than Star Trek. I love them in different ways, but I think the original Twilight Zone might be my favorite TV series of all time. I mean, it's an anthology show, but it might be my favorite TV series of all time. For real. Jason S. says, I love the original Twilight Zone. And by the way, 157 episodes. They're not all bangers, but a lot of them are. And so the Twilight Zone ran from 1959 to 1964. And if you want to be a writer, I don't think that there's any better way to learn how to write than watching half-hour Twilight Zone episodes, especially the best ones. Because within a half an hour, this is why they're so great. In a half an hour, you have to set up characters and a premise and pay it all off in 30 minutes. So as an exercise, Twilight Zone stories, breaking them down and learning how to tell a story, I don't think that there's any better way to understand storytelling, the mechanics of storytelling, than watching Twilight Zone episodes. Really amazing. So Jason S. says, I love the original Twilight Zone and Star Trek. Of all the reboots they've done, they've never been able to recreate their success. I think it was just a state of mind of the time when they had to rely on story and not special effects. Oh, I totally agree with you. And to a certain extent, while it's not as good as Star Trek or Twilight Zone, I also love The Outer Limits. But you're right. I mean, they did not have the effects, and it was all storytelling. But it's all, I mean, the way that the Twilight Zone could jump between the utterly fantastical and sci-fi and then do something that was very grounded and down to earth. Even an episode like A Stop at Willoughby, where a guy gets off the train and he's in a town he grew up in when he was a kid, or Walking Distance, or I mean, everybody remembers the whether it's Time Enough at Last, Burgess Meredith breaks his glasses, or The Invaders, or 20,000 Nightmare at 20,000 Feet with Shatner. All that stuff is great, but the Twilight Zone also did episodes that were much more lyrical and much more emotional too. And it's just an amazing series. So I totally agree. And why it was able to be done, well, there's a lot of crossover. There was a lot of the same writers wrote for people like Richard Matheson and George Clayton Johnson. George Clayton Johnson wrote for both Star Trek and The Twilight Zone. So did Richard Matheson. And they were some of the great fantasists of the age and of the time growing up. I mean, these were men of letters that were writing for these shows. And they wrote novels, they wrote plays, they wrote short stories. They were real consummate writers. I think another problem, and I'll flat out say this, I think one of the problems with first of all, the people that are writing modern Star Trek don't have any science fiction background. I mean, clearly. And to have a science fiction background is to understand how to extrapolate. Like, you just take an idea. Any idea, like Darmok. 200 Watt Studio brings up the idea of Darmok. Okay, so you have a race of creatures, a race of aliens, sentient beings, that speak in metaphor. That idea is not necessarily science fiction, but what it does is it sets up, first of all, it's a really interesting idea, a society that speaks in metaphor. How would we learn how to converse with that civilization? That's a great science fiction premise, and that from that premise, you can build a story. And that's what great science fiction is all about, and great fantasy, and great horror, for that matter. You have an interesting premise, and it should somehow reflect back on humanity, and you tell a story. The problem with something like Strange New Worlds and like that musical episode, I don't care about the interpersonal relationships of the crew. I don't even know why I'm watching a Star Trek. They have 10 episodes. If you're doing 10 episodes of Star Trek, they used to do 26 a season. Those 10 episodes should all be brilliant. All of them should be brilliant. But they're not. And all they're doing is copying other stuff. Star Trek Strange New Worlds, it's Buffy, it's this, it's that, it's all this other stuff. But you know what it isn't? Star Trek. And it's frustrating to watch. And I don't understand why. I got to tell you something. A friend of mine recommended that I watch a movie called UFO that was made in 2018. It said it was a low-budget indie movie. And here's the thing. It is a very low-budget indie movie that was... The idea came from a supposed UAP or UFO sighting at a Chicago airport. It's a really clever, really interesting film that was all about science and knowledge, and it doesn't have some big gigantic ending. But I was watching this and I'm thinking, wow, this indie. I contacted the director on Instagram. I do this a lot. There's people out there. And I wrote him a Instagram message, and he wrote back to me, and I want to have him come on the show because I'm curious. He's made other films. I want to talk to him about this movie. And I saw this movie, and I'm like, this movie is just, I was completely captivated by it, and I knew that it was really low budget, and I knew that it wasn't going to have some big conflagration at the end where some Close Encounters Devil's Tower ending. I knew it wasn't going to end that way, but it ended the way that it should have ended, and I really enjoyed it. And it's funny, I have this now I haven't seen this yet, but this is a science fiction movie, Brightwood. Again, I love really clever, low budget sci-fi. Kind of like Resolution and The Endless. I love Moorhead and what's his face? The two guys. Why am I blanking on them? But those movies are great. I'm looking forward to this. UFO, good stuff. Check it out. And I like that. Why can't we get that from Star Trek? I don't know. By the way, 20 minutes for Hegemony. Gonna be on. Woohoo! I get pissed off again. BK Dan says, Rob, an FYI about SG-1. Atlantis starts and runs parallel with SG-1 starting in Season 8. Universe is on its own and after SG-1 and Atlantis. That is good to know. Sean Hoover says that the musical episode of Strange New Worlds could have been their Darmok. That is true. It could have, but it wasn't. 200 Watt Studio says the Robert Redford episode of Twilight Zone is top 10. It's a great show. That's a great episode. And, Robert, that's a heartbreaking episode too. But a great episode of Twilight Zone. Again, it's amazing who shows up in the Twilight Zone. Yes, Robert Redford's in a Twilight Zone episode. Telly Savalas, Who Loves You, Baby? Everyone's in a Twilight Zone episode, it seems like. They had a great cast. But if you guys haven't watched Twilight Zone, by the way, if I'd seen Twilight Zone growing up every episode a million times. The Blu-rays, seeing Twilight Zone remastered in HD is insane because of the beautiful black and white photography. Watching it on NTSC broadcast TV did not do it justice. When I got that, get those CBS remastered Blu-rays. Oh my God, do they look good. And plus they're chock-a-block full of extra features. It's so good. And also, I can't recommend Mark Scott Zachry's book, The Twilight Zone Companion, highly enough. It's great. So pick that up. BK Dan said, here's a stumper. Chris Carter's show Millennium. Yeah, man. I had really... Millennium... there's a show that they didn't quite get a handle on what it was. I mean, to me, it was Seven, the TV series. But the first season of that show, I really love. And then they kept changing the premise. And then they didn't know where they were going to go. And then they ended it on an X-Files episode. It was shitty. But the first season of Millennium, and first of all, Lance Henriksen's so great. But they couldn't... It's... that show's maddening. It's maddening. But the first season is really, really good. I really do love the first season of that show. Well, this has been a crazy episode of this. I don't even think I got to my topic. I didn't fill it out, but I'm going to end this show now. I read all the letters. If you want to send me letters, you can send them to postgeeksingularity.com. Do that. I'm going to go prepare myself to watch Gemini in 15 minutes, and probably throw things at the screen and, die a little bit inside again as they villainize the Gorn even more. I just can't. Khan Noonien sings great-great-granddaughter. I love the meme that Swag Props sent out, that I tweeted out, with Kirk talking to Khan. I'm sorry, I broke your daughter, or broke your great-great-great-granddaughter's heart. What? Kirk's like, what? Oh, God, I hate that show. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here. This has been a fun romp of a Robservations. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for moderating. And I don't know who else is here, but Tom Jr. Jackson. I don't know if anyone else moderated, but I want to thank you for being here. And all of my friends, all of you guys. There will be, by the way, a member call this weekend. We didn't have one last weekend, but this weekend we will. So for you members, and there will be, Dieter will be back on Let's Get Physical Media. So on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to all of you, have a better night, but I really can't say that because you're all going to go watch a Gemini now, and you're all going to be like, fuck this show. No, probably some of you are going to say, like, no, this is good. We're going to watch Xenomorphs. Wow, these aliens, you get to see a destroyed starship, you get to see all this Star Trek iconography you've seen a million times in other things before, and not a shred of originality. And why are the Gorn evil? Why? Why do you have to make them that way? Why are the Gorn even on? Canonically, they shouldn't even be here. I won't get mad. Hey, if you guys want to watch it, it might be good. Maybe it'll end on a cliffhanger. Maybe somebody will die. Maybe Kirk should do what he should have done, which is take Lon to bed. Show her what's up. You know what I'm saying? That's what I would have done. That's another thing. Kirk's like, oh, no, Carol Marcus is pregnant. Whatever happened to Carol Marcus saying that we're not part of each other's lives? They don't even get that right. I mean, that could have been something to bond on, Kirk was grappling with the fact that Carol Marcus is pregnant with his child, but told him that she wanted him to stay away. That would have been interesting. And it would have been, because even though, look, I like Paul Wesley. I don't like him as Kirk, but I like it. I like what he's doing in the show. And I'm like, why does he have to be Kirk? Why does he have to be Kirk? Why can't he be an original? Why aren't there any original characters that they've created on the show? And the one they did create, the descendant of Khan Noonien Singh. Why does she have to be a descendant of Khan Noonien Singh? She's great. I love Christina Chong as an actress. She's an actual recording star, but I really like what she's doing as that character. Why does she have to be it is nonsensical that she is a descendant of Khan Noonien Singh that even has any descendants. It's stupid. They should have made her own character. Why? Don't get me started. Am I on a Star Trek rant? I don't even know it. I was trying to say goodnight. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. I appreciate everybody supporting the channel via Super Chats and tips. It's very nice of you. We got good stuff coming up. It's been a little discombobulated this month and last month. Things are, but hey, we're still here. Thanks for being here. I don't know why it's taking me. This is a Return of the King ending. Why don't I go to the Grey Havens? Perhaps I should sing some Annie Lennox. Lay down. All right, I'm going. Bye. Shh, don't tell anyone.